Let's get together, talk about the movies that we saw this week. We'll have discussions, talk film news, we'll laugh a lot and act like geeks. Sometimes we'll have a guest or two, sometimes it's just the two of us. Let's crack some jokes and tell some folks to come along and hang with us. Mike and Mike go to the movies. Mike and Mike go to the movies. Yeah!
You have chosen wise.
You know, people keep asking me if this podcast is back. And I haven't really had an answer, but you know what? Yeah. I'm thinking it's back. Welcome to Mike and Mike Go to the Movies, Episode 2. I'm Mike Smith. Joining me, as always, is a man who once killed 3 men in a bar with a fucking pencil.
Mike DeCriscio.
How you doing today, Mike?
I'm super excited. I was shocked by how low that number is. I forgot.
That it's only episode 2? Yeah, right. I mean, it's weird because we've done, there's 104 episodes of our previous podcast, and this podcast is basically the same, so it's weird that this is only episode 2.
Yeah.
But still, it's a new beginning. It's a new dawn for the podcast. And joining us for this episode is our music supervisor, which is a title that I just gave him now, but I think fits because he's the guy who composes all of our theme songs. Kyle Cullen, welcome to Mike and Mike Go to the Movies.
I'm honored.
Yes. Now, last time you joined us on Film Bookcast, it was for a 2019 movie in which Ian McShane had to warn people about the Baba Yaga, so we thought it was only fitting that you joined us for our John Wick Chapter 3 review as well.
You know what? That A plus. That was perfect.
There you go. Now
I'll be doing no Ian McShane impressions this time, though.
You say that now.
I do. We'll see where the night takes us.
I'm not sure you can resist doing your Ian McShane impression. I'm just throwing that out there. Yeah. All the theme songs you'll hear this episode were created by you, Kyle Cullen, and our logo was designed by Jacob Honeycutt, or at Jacob Honey on Twitter. If you ever want to contact us and respond to something we did on the show, you can email us over at mikeandmikegotothemovies@gmail.com. Now, today we're going to start with some discussions where we each discuss whatever piece of media we've been consuming lately, and then we are moving straight into our featured review of John Wick Chapter 3, Parabellum. After that, Kyle's going to leave us, so Mike and I can have an open discussion on Game of Thrones, where we'll talk the finale, the final season as a whole, and what our overall thoughts on the show are now that it's over. Kyle, you were almost able to join us for that discussion, right?
I was so close. Just before I turned on my computer and set up all my stuff here, I finished Season 7.
Jeez.
And oh man, it was rough.
Yeah, so for some background, Mike and I have been watching Game of Thrones since basically the beginning, or at least I think I started watching it right after Season 1 aired on TV, and Mike, I think you started watching it right after Season 2 or something like that. Like you caught up then, right? Is that right?
Yeah. So I was home from school one year and watched Seasons 1 and 2.
Yeah, so we've been watching the show for, upwards of 7 or 8 years. Kyle is just jumping on the bandwagon now.
Just in time.
You started watching Game of Thrones, I think, halfway through this season's airing, right? Like this season,
yes.
Season 8 was airing on TV, and you were like, you know what? I'm going to give this Game of Thrones thing a shot.
I've heard a lot about this Game of Thrones. Seems like people might like this show. I think I should give it the old college try. Yeah. See what I think about it.
Exactly. And, when you were doing pretty well, you were watching it really quickly. And I was like, if you keep up this pace, maybe you'll be able to join us for our big Game of Thrones discussion on this episode because, I think it'll be interesting to have your perspective as somebody who watched the entire thing in 3 weeks. As opposed to me and Mike who've been watching it for 7 or 8 years. But unfortunately, you just didn't cross that finish line.
Yeah, it just... This has taken a lot out of me. It's been tough.
It's been an emotionally draining experience.
That is the lightest way of putting it. Man, it's been an experience nonetheless.
All right, cool. Well, you'll talk a little bit more about your experience so far with the show and discussions, which we're going to get into right now. Let's do discussions on Mike and Mike Go to the Movies.
Watch this. These are my discussions. Just when I thought I said all I could say, my buddy and I talk about movies we see. These are my discussions. There is so much to see, you and me. So we're gonna talk about movies for our discussions.
All right, it's time to get into our discussions here on Mike and Mike Go to the Movies. So, Mike, we're going to kick things off with you. What do you have to discuss with us today?
Today I have quite a handful of movies, the first of which is the new Shudder original joint called The Ranger.
Yo, Chelsea, that guy bothering you?
The mountain's closed.
It's Chelsea's mountain. She's got a house up there. Chelsea, tell him. How about that? Yo, it actually exists.
Here's being alive.
Hey!
You remember me?
It's all kind of a blur.
How'd you end up with a crowd like that?
WB!
Girl, I remember wouldn't be running with them kind of kids.
Maybe we should leave this place. Relax. Coming here was a really bad idea.
Okay.
Directed by Jen Wexler. Her first feature-length movie. So that's pretty neat. I love that Shudder does that a lot. It's a cool platform for horror movies, and they're giving people a chance,
Yeah, give them a shot. So I have no familiarity with The Ranger. I've not seen anything about this, so give us everything you know.
Okay, so this is the story of this group of punk kids, the studded leather jacket with all the patches and the purple hair and all that stuff.
I'm in.
And they're at like you're in, right? You're at it starts
This sounds
at
right up Mike's alley.
it's at an underground show. They're doing coke or whatever they're doing, and the cops bust in, and there's a scuffle, and one of them stabs a police officer. So they got a split. They jump in their like mystery machine van looking thing, and they remember one of them's got a family cabin in the woods, up in the mountains. We got to lay low, and they get there. Or on the way up, they encounter the like national park ranger, right? And he has that moment where he's like, "You darn city kids littering and spray painting." And there's some like shared history with one of the characters and this guy, and it just turns into a slasher movie basically, where it's this park ranger hunting down these punk kids in the woods, and it's pretty crazy. It's fine. It's like I think it's a tight like 90 minutes or so, which is like just what you need for this kind of movie. It's got a really like fast paced punk soundtrack,
nice.
Which is really cool for like a slasher movie. You never really see that kind of thing. So it's, I think I saw it's like a quote unquote neo slasher or something like that. So it's neat. It's fun. It's on Shudder. It's pretty quick. The performance is really cool. It's really violent. Like it's not quite like Saulnier level gore or anything like that.
I was gonna say, it kind of sounds like Green Room a little bit.
Yeah, it reminded me of that a lot, but leans much more into the like overt horror slasher tropes and stuff.
Very cool.
And the guy, I didn't write it down, but the guy who's playing the ranger is really unsettling. Like he's very fucking creepy, but also really goofy. Where he's like, he'll kill somebody and like throw him in the back of the trunk, and he's like, "Remember, leave nothing but footprints." And he closes the trunk, and it's just like, just stupid one-liners.
Yeah,
it's good stuff. So that's the Ranger. Next up, I got The Flesh Eaters, which is a 1964, a 1964 like local to Long Island movie. I think it was filmed out in Montauk, and it's a monster beach movie kind of thing. It's these guys are this pilot is trying to fly this like actress to Rhode Island or some shit. I don't remember exactly. And they crash land in a storm on this island. They never mention that it's Long Island or anything. And there's like this Nazi scientist guy there who's been experimenting on stuff, and they're in the water, and they're the flesh eaters, and they strip the flesh off the bones, and it's just that kind of like early 1960s monster movie schlock, and it's just fun and goofy. And one of the characters is this washed up actress who's always drunk, and she's the best character ever. She's just making fun of the Nazi guy the whole time, even, like he's a secret, like he doesn't say that he's a Nazi, but she's like, whatever, It's fun. It's a goofy movie. And something very different from that I watched, which is Dogtooth, 2009's Yorgos Lanthimos' a directorial debut also.
Yeah, I think I've been telling you to watch Dogtooth for years at this point, I think, right?
Yeah. Yes, you have. This is a movie I see come up a lot, on Reddit or something like that when people ask, like, what's the most disturbing movie you've ever seen? Dogtooth is always in there in that discussion. And I get it now. Very disturbing.
Yeah.
And I don't even really know how to, like, describe what the plot of this movie is. It's this family in like these parents keep their kids locked in their compound kind of thing, and they completely brainwash them and warp definition of words. There's a scene where they're having dinner, and she's like, "Oh, please pass the telephone," and she hands the daughter her salt, like the salt shaker, and it was like, "Oh my god!" That scene, it's the simplest detail, and it blew my mind. That's how much they've warped these children, and they're like, I say children, they look like teenagers and/or very young adults, right? And there's a lot of weird sex shit going on. which to put it very lightly. And it's just dark and twisted. And I need to see more of Lanthimos's original work, because I think I've only seen The Favorite, which is not, he didn't write it, right?
Right. I think it's the first thing he directed that he hasn't written, actually.
So I need to see more of his stuff, because I'm just so curious about what his brain must be like. 'Cause it's twisted. This movie is very twisted.
Yeah, I mean, I saw Dogtooth. I was in high school when I saw Dogtooth. I was like 17, maybe. I think it was like 2009, 2010 that movie came out.
Whoa.
And yeah, I was not well equipped to handle Dogtooth at that time. But it was one of those things where it just stayed in my mind. And I think I made a roommate watch it in the college, like sophomore year or something like that. And I don't think he ever forgave me. It's one of those things. And I haven't watched it since then, honestly, like probably since I was in high school. Yeah, it has really stuck with me though. I remember there was one scene where like that involved the movies Jaws and Rocky, and like how like the kids watched those movies and that kind of warped their perception of the outside world in a weird way. And like it's a wild movie. It's a wild movie.
Yeah. Yeah, there's one daughter like sneakily gets her hands on these VHS tapes of Jaws and Rocky, and like it blows like that's the climactic scene. Like it blows the lid off everything when she starts quoting Jaws.
Yes.
What the fuck? What's happening? But it's very good. Check it out.
All right.
If you can. Next up, I have 1986's Chopping Mall.
Yes. This is another one that I've been telling you to watch forever.
Yes, you have.
You clumsy son of a bitch! Look what you did. I ought to turn you into scrap metal for this.
May I see your identification badge, please?
Identification badge?
Do not make any sudden moves.
Sudden move? I'll give you a sudden move upside your head. What the hell is that? What is this, you worthless pile of junk, huh? Hey, look. I'm like you, you know? I work here. See? Huh? See that? Oh, shit. I knew you bastards were going to be trouble when I first brought you in here.
This is available on Amazon Prime Video. Dogtooth, by the way, was on Shudder, and Flesh Eaters is on YouTube because it's from 1964. So,
gotcha.
But Chopping Mall, this is a Corman-adjacent film. I think it's produced by Roger Corman's wife, right?
I believe that's right, yes.
Yeah. So it's in that realm of just like... It's a teen B-movie, basically, like a drive-in violent movie. I think it's like an hour and 10 minutes or 15 minutes or something like that. It's amazing. Like, that's the... I wish more movies were this short, because it just gets straight to the point. And the point of this whole movie, which... Well, I guess now you haven't done it in a recent episode, but the whole point of this movie, there's this mall who's hired this company to put robotic security guards in the mall after midnight or after close. And spoiler alert, they are murderous robots because it's 1986.
Yes.
So these teenagers that work in the mall decide to stay late after close and party in like the department store, which is the weirdest thing, but so perfect.
Yes.
And
it's one of the best teenage parties of all time, too. All the kids are having sex in front of each other. It's great.
Yeah, except for the two like kind of shy, awkward people that like have just been set up are sitting there watching a monster movie, and it's like, amazing. And the robots think they're intruders, so they start trying to kill them all, and it's just... That's it. It's violent. It's silly. It's an hour and 10 minutes or whatever it is. And there's my amazing line, one of my favorite things that I've seen in a movie in a long time, where the guys break into like the sporting goods store and they take all the guns, you know, and they like have that classic montage of them strapping all the bullets and the guns and the putting the things in the holsters.
Yeah.
And one of them goes, "Let's send these motherfuckers a Rambogram," and like locks the gun, and it's like, oh my god, that's exactly the quality that I want in movies.
Yeah.
Fucking perfect.
That's incredible.
I love Chopping Mall. Plus, you get a couple of like cool appearances from some Roger Corman actors. Like Dick Miller shows up at one point. Paul Bartel and his wife Mary. I'm blanking on her name, but like they were in Rock and Roll High School together, and they were in a lot of the Roger Corman movies together. They show up at the beginning as like the people criticizing the robots and be like, "I don't know about this," like that. Kind of thing.
This seems like it could be dangerous.
Yes,
it's great. And then my last discussion. This is another Joe Bob Briggs one that I got to see from the last drive-in on Shudder.
Okay.
Clearly, I spent a lot of time watching Shudder this past 2 weeks, getting the use of that subscription. And this is 1987's Street Trash. And Street Trash is the dirtiest movie I've ever seen, I think. It's in the introduction, Joe Bob talks about it being in the subgenre of movies called melt movies.
Okay.
Which is just about people melting, basically.
It's an interesting subgenre.
Yeah, I forget what other ones he lists as examples, but basically,
does he mention Heavy Metal by any chance? The animated movie Heavy Metal?
No,
because
he doesn't.
I remember watching that in college, and I was watching that with my roommate at the time, EJ. And we kind of looked at each other at one point, and we were like, a lot of people have melted in this movie. Because there's it's a weird one, because Heavy Metal is an anthology movie, and so, theoretically, there's different things happening in each anthology short, but in all of them, somebody gets melted in different ways. It's great.
Awesome.
No, he doesn't talk about that.
Okay.
I want to say, maybe The Thing, or something along those lines. Just gross body horror, basically. And there's a loose story in this movie, and it is about these homeless people that live in the junkyard on the border between Brooklyn and Queens. And the liquor store, the guy that runs the neighborhood liquor store, finds a crate of old wine or something, some kind of liquor or whatever in the basement that he forgot about or something. And he's like, well, whatever, I'll sell it for $1. And it melts people when they drink it. That's it. That's the whole plot. And
Okay.
it's just the ultimate sleazy movie. It's gross. They hate, clearly these people thought that homeless people are the worst, these filmmakers, because they just are disgusting. There's an extended, keep away football scene with a severed penis, where a guy cuts off, they're in the junkyard,
something.
and the guy accidentally pees on somebody, and the guy pulls a knife and cuts his dick off, and then we play keep away with it for 2 or 3 minutes.
Jesus Christ.
Including slow-mo and diving, and it's a whole thing. But the special effects are outrageous. They're absolutely amazing because they melt maybe 5 or 6 people on screen. It's incredible. And Joe Bob has this, his whole thing is the fun tidbits, right, about these movies. And this one is incredible where the director, it's a student film he talks about, and the director named James Murrow inherited money from somebody and bought a Steadicam because it was the new hotness in the early 80s,
Yeah.
And this movie has heavy, incredible use of Steadicam, chase scenes down alleyways and through the junkyard and stuff, just with amazing Steadicam. And the guy, James Murrow, went on to be the highest paid Steadicam operator in Hollywood, including making all of James Cameron's movies.
Really?
That's awesome.
Yeah, and he started with Street Trash, so it's pretty insane. I don't know. Check it out if you're into just disgusting, sleazy movies where people melt into purple muck puddles. Because that's what happens in this movie.
How could you not be? All right, that wraps up your discussions, Mike?
Yes, that's all the
right.
things.
That's some good stuff. That is a lot of good exploitation B-movie schlock that you got going on there, and I am all about it. It's very on brand for you.
And I just did a big, or not a big order, but I ordered 4 more movies from Vinegar Syndrome, so stay tuned for more of it coming up.
So stay tuned for Mike to put off watching them for months at a time, and then then remember that he has them.
They do them all at once.
Listen.
All right, now let's move on to my discussions. I got some recent stuff I wanted to talk about, the first of which is a new documentary called Hail Satan, with a question mark at the end of it, so it's really Hail Satan?
It's the church lady? Is this about the church lady?
No. It's directed by Penny Lane. No relation to the Beatles song. Her name is actually Penny Lane.
That was going to be my first question.
Yeah. Actually, she's from the Hudson Valley. She worked with a lot of, I think it was the Mid-Hudson Children's Museum or something. She's worked with, a couple of organizations in Poughkeepsie that I'm familiar with. But
wow.
Anyway, this is a new documentary about the Satanic Temple. That's, just about, the Church of Satan and how they kind of started a few years ago and how they've kind of grown over time. And it's really interesting. It's engaging. It's funny. I think it played at Sundance or South by Southwest or something a few months back, and it got pretty good reviews there. It's mostly about their quest to get a Baphomet statue to sit side by side with a Ten Commandments statue at an Arkansas courthouse, which was in the news, so you guys might be familiar with that story.
Vaguely.
And it's really about the separation of church and state and how they're kind of working for that. And it's a pretty solid movie. It's worth watching, especially if you sort of view the Satanic Temple as sort of a joke in the past, because in some ways they are, but they're not literal Satan worshippers, and they're doing some actual good work in the world. And this documentary kind of shines a light on that, and it's really interesting. It's engaging. So yeah, definitely worth checking out. It's called Hail Satan, and it was playing at the Roxy Theater here in Missoula, Montana, which is right by my house. Just throwing that out there.
In case you didn't know.
That
sounds like an invite.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's playing there anymore. But if you wanted to just stop by, hang out at the Roxy, crash in my place, it's worth going to. That goes to anybody listening to this podcast. All right, and then I have the recent Memorial Day weekend releases. I saw all three of the big ones. Aladdin.
Hey, can you make me a prince?
There is a lot of gray area in Make Me a Prince. I could just make you a prince.
Oh, no.
Right, you'll be snuggled up with that dude for the rest of your life.
Y'all see my powers?
Be specific with your words. The deal is in the detail.
Got it.
Which I don't really understand, because if she already likes you, why change?
I told you, she has to marry a prince.
I just want to go home, man.
Okay, I can do that.
Which is the new live-action Disney remake, directed by Guy Ritchie, which is still weird.
Yeah.
And were you guys excited about Aladdin? Like, on a scale of like 1 to 10, what was your interest in the live-action Aladdin?
I'd say like a 6, maybe.
Okay, Kyle?
So, when it first got announced, because what was the one that came before it?
Dumbo just came out 2 months ago.
Oh, not that one. I don't give a shit about Dumbo.
Mary Poppins
Jungle
Returns
Book?
came out a few weeks.
Jungle Book's the one I'm thinking of mostly.
Well, that was 2016, and Beauty and the Beast came out in 2017.
Well, fuck that too.
Okay, so the first one they did.
Yeah, Jungle Book. That's the one I remember because I enjoyed that.
Yeah.
And I remember thinking, I think that's actually the only one that I enjoyed out of all the Disney live-action reboots. I kind of put the other ones out of my mind. So
Clearly, I just told you about 6 of them, and they didn't.
I know, and I didn't see it. I saw one of those and didn't see the rest. But I remembered the one that I liked, and I was like, you know what? Maybe. And then I remember they dropped the first trailer, or the first teaser, and I was like, this looks fucking stupid. And then they dropped another trailer that I thought was a lot more promising.
Okay.
And I've been fairly excited for it. I thought it looked like it could be fun.
All right. I was not excited for Aladdin at all, guys. Like,
Wow.
I'm not surprised.
And I love the original Aladdin. I think the original Aladdin's great. But I've been really burnt out on these live action Disney movies, the Disney remakes. I thought the Jungle Book was pretty good when it came out. I loved Pete's Dragon. Pete's Dragon, far and away the best of these remakes. Beauty and the Beast I thought was pretty underwhelming. Didn't care for that one that much. You know, Mary Poppins Returns as a sequel, so I'm not counting that, even though it kind of is a remake. But that one's good. But really, when it's like Beauty and the Beast, and now they got The Lion King coming out, and Dumbo just came out, and that wasn't that great. You know, I think these movies just tend to like they seem like fundamentally just like they're not going to work because all these stories were developed for animation, right? They and especially Aladdin, which is so reliant on the animation of that movie to bring the genie to life. Like the genie doesn't seem like a character that can work in a live action setting. And I will say, I saw the Broadway version of Aladdin also about a year or two ago, and I thought the Broadway version was pretty good. It was fun-ish. I had issues with some of the stuff in that version too. Like they gave Aladdin like 3 best friends instead of Monkey, who are like rambunctious and wild, and I hated them. But and they also give Jasmine 3 best friends in that show too. It's weird, but like the genies though in the show is very good, and like they do a lot of like fun stage stuff that you can only do on stage with the genie, which is what you should be doing with it. Like I think with a character like the genie, you need to adapt to whatever medium you're into. And with these Disney live action remakes, I feel like they're just taking the animated version and trying to do exactly the same thing, but less so. Like, just a lesser version of the same thing. And so I saw Aladdin, and it was fine. It was basically fine. I think the first 40 minutes are really rough. Like, they're really bad. And I think a few of the roles are pretty miscast. Like, I think Aladdin was miscast. I think Jafar was miscast. But once Will Smith shows up as the genie, like, things get smoother. Like, he's having fun. The genie stuff is fun. It's not as good as the Robin Williams stuff because Will Smith can't do voices. He can only do Will Smith. And, it doesn't have the same energy that the original does, but it does have a lot more fun visually with what it's doing than I maybe expected it to, based on the clips that we were seeing before the movie came out. Like when they dropped the clip of Prince Ali, like that really bugged me because the clip that they show is just like Genie singing Prince Ali going through the city, but it just looks like a parade. Like it just looks like a parade going through the city. Whereas you compare it to the animated version, and you have like Robin Williams like zooming over here, and now he's like part of the he's a little kid, and now he's over here, and he's a big fat guy, and like all that stuff. And like they weren't doing that in Prince Ali, and they do end up doing a little bit of that in like the second half of the song. They didn't release online for some reason, but it's still not the same. It's fine. It's okay. It's a fun little one-off, but not something anyone should ever have to watch when the original exists, and is so clearly superior in every way. That said, it is directed by Guy Ritchie, and there are a couple of fun little Guy Ritchie moments throughout, if you're a fan of his work. Like, there's some slow-mo action scenes that happen, and there's even one moment where they flash back to something that happened just a few minutes ago. which I was very delighted to see happen, because that's something that happens in like all of Guy Ritchie's movies, and I was like, oh, that's okay. But yeah, overall, Aladdin, it's a fine viewing experience with a fun Will Smith performance. Naomi Scott's pretty good as Jasmine, but it just feels like it's a cover version of Aladdin, and it's just not as good of a version. Anyway, that's Aladdin. I also saw another movie called Brightburn, which have you guys seen the trailers for this movie?
Yes.
Okay. Were you intrigued by the premise for Brightburn?
Very.
Okay.
Sorta.
Yeah. All right. Well, this is a new horror movie produced by James Gunn and written by Brian Gunn and Mark Gunn, who are, you guessed it, related to James Gunn. It's basically,
what?
Basically, it's a what-if story taking the Superman mythology and asking the question of what it would play out like if, as he was growing up, Superman turned out to be evil. And I had a lot of fun with this. I thought it was a pretty good time. It uses Superman as a starting point, but it's mostly its own thing. Got Elizabeth Banks in there, David Denman, they're the main couple. Also Badger from Breaking Bad's in this, so that was fun. And Steve Agee also has a scene in this too. A couple of like James Gunn like regulars like Steve Agee. Michael Rooker shows up for a scene as well. Some of the kills also really gruesome. Like super gnarly, like way more gnarly than I thought they were going to be, and I was all on board with that. It's a real horror movie too. That's the thing that I think makes it work. It doesn't just play around with the superhero mythology. Like it actually like just plays it like straight. Like no, this is like a slasher movie basically. And it was solid. It's Banks and Denman are good together. They know exactly what they're doing here. There's also a very fun Easter egg for James Gunn fans towards the end of this movie. I just want to throw that out there. I won't say what it is, but if you're a fan of James Gunn's career and his previous movies, there's a really cool shout out to one of his other things that is pretty fun. Brightburn. I enjoyed this one a lot.
Yeah, the one headline I saw about it said it was something along the lines of the supervillain movie turns out to be a secret gore movie. I was like, whoa, that's interesting.
Yeah, and it's been a very divisive movie, too. I should point that out. I think maybe people were misled by the marketing about what the movie actually is. But, I've seen, there's the critics that I follow on Letterboxd and stuff. It has ranged everywhere from, 1 star to 4 stars kind of thing. It's all over the place. I think it's a solid, 3 out of 5. It's just a really enjoyable horror movie time. Kind of in the vein of some of the stuff that Mike was talking about earlier. So definitely, I think worth checking out. And then finally, I have one more movie to discuss here, and it's the best one of all the ones I'm talking about today, and that is Booksmart.
We have to go to a party tonight.
What?
Let's go to Nick's party.
Are you kidding? No way.
We only have one night left to have studied and partied in high school. Otherwise, we're just going to be the girls that missed out. We haven't done anything. We haven't broken any rules.
Okay. We've broken a lot of rules. 1, we have fake IDs.
Fake college IDs so we can get into their 24-hour library.
Name one person whose life was so much better because they broke a couple of rules.
Picasso.
He broke art rules. Name a person who broke a real rule.
Rosa Parks.
Name another one.
Susan B. Anthony.
God damn it.
Which is the new movie directed by Olivia Wilde, and it's a comedy starring Beanie Feldstein from Lady Bird. She was Lady Bird's best friend in that movie. And Caitlin Dever from Justified. And she was on Justified when she was 10 years old. And she was always amazing on Justified, and I'm so glad that she's in this movie. Which is very cool. Have you guys seen the trailers for Booksmart?
Yes.
I remember seeing one trailer, yeah.
Okay, only one. I feel like I've seen this trailer in front of every movie I've seen over the past 4 months. But apparently other people feel differently, because this movie didn't do that well at the box office this weekend. And that's kind of a bummer, because this movie's great. It's about two nerdy girls on the last day of high school who decide they need to do some actual partying before they head off to college. It's basically Superbad, but with girls, and updated for 2019, and it's great. It's very funny. Billie Lourd, Carrie Fisher's daughter, is in this movie, and she's amazing in it. She's kind of she's not she's not like McLovin in Superbad, but she kind of serves the same function as McLovin in Superbad, if that makes sense. It's a very different character, but utilized in a similar way, and she's great. It's also just a really good portrait of what high school is like, female friendship. It's populated with some great cast members. Jason Sudeikis in this movie, Lisa Kudrow, Will Forte, Mike O'Brien, Jessica Williams, and it's the debut directorial film for Olivia Wilde, and it's a very strong one at that. There's one sequence towards the end that really hits hard emotionally, and a lot of that comes from the way she directs that sequence. I think it's sort of a tracking shot that goes for one take, and it's really remarkable. Plus, the movie's just really, really funny. Like I had a blast watching it. So yeah, Booksmart. It's out in theaters right now, and it needs some support. So go out and see it. Is my recommendation, and that's the best of the movies that I've talked about today. And yeah, now Kyle, what do you got to discuss with us today?
So very briefly, Game of Thrones, like you said, I started it just a couple weeks ago, and I've been powering through it, 2 or 3 episodes a night, and it's been quite the journey.
Yeah.
I have been putting off watching Game of Thrones for a really long time.
I've been telling you to watch Game of Thrones for years, because I knew you would.
Exactly, yeah.
Because you're a huge Lord of the Rings fan.
Exactly, and I'm a fan of like this high fantasy, Lord of the Rings, D&D, that kind of stuff, and I'm always been a fan of it. And I knew that I was going to love Game of Thrones, and I knew it was going to consume me. And I wasn't ready for that to happen. I knew, because I know myself, and I'm really bad when it comes to binging TV shows. And I think Daredevil was the first one that I got super into, and I stayed up till 4 a.m. on a work night watching Daredevil, and I was like, oh, fuck, this is bad.
Man, if only you could have done that for a good show.
I know, right?
I was just going to say, if you did that for Daredevil, I can't imagine what you did for...
So, for this one, luckily, I have a little bit more restraint, and I'd watch it till like 12 o'clock, 1 in the morning.
I think your restraint is that you have a fiance who will make you go to bed, I believe is how that works, right? Is that what you're talking about?
That's another way of saying it. I like to think that I personally have the restraint. But, no, I got up to season 4, like halfway through season 4, and she started watching with me again because she got up to the Red Wedding, and they got really upset and stopped watching the show.
Wow!
But she was like, "Oh, I want to start watching it again." So we've been watching the last half of the series together, and it's been quite the journey because I love this stuff, and every time there's like a really gory thing, she's covering her face and looking away, and
yeah,
she's like, I don't like this. Why am I watching this? And like, I don't know, but it's been fun to share it with someone. I don't have to like stew over it by myself. I can talk to her about it when it's over. I can't talk to everyone else about it. It's like, dude, we watched that like 4 years ago. I don't know what you're talking about. It's been a lot of fun. I've really enjoyed it, and I think watching it all at once has been beneficial in that people that I've talked to, when they get to the later seasons, they're like, oh man, I can't believe they came back to this. They did this in like season 2. This is when that got introduced. And I'm like, yeah, I remember. That was like 3 or 4 days ago.
Right. I mean, that's kind of why I was hoping to get your perspective when we get to the actual discussion in a bit, because which obviously we can't do because you haven't watched the final season yet.
Yeah.
But I think that would have been a really interesting way to talk about it, because I mean, the final season, I don't know if you've been following the online discourse or like if you've talked to people who have watched the final season. Reception to it has been like divisive at best. Let's like put it that way.
At the very best.
At the very best. But I'm really curious to see what you think of the final season, because honestly, the people who have been complaining about the final season have, like, their complaints have been like there from like season 5 or 6 onward, and it's just been getting kind of louder and louder since then. And I will say I'm a fan of season 6 and 7. I think those are both very good seasons of the show, and I. Like, not to give too much away, but I overall liked season 8 of Game of Thrones. But it's definitely like the flaws are there; they're evident. But it's like I'm curious if you watched it all at once, if you just watched one big blowout Game of Thrones thing, like if you would even notice that, or if it just like is the right pace for you, kind of thing.
I will definitely let you know.
Okay.
Unfortunately, I can't do that today.
Yeah.
But yeah, I am very much looking forward to season 8. I've heard. Unfortunately, I've spoiled it for myself by just existing. It's impossible to avoid. Yeah. But I've been doing my best because, like I've said, I've just got into it, and there have been stuff online for years of crazy things that happened. Like, I knew about the Red Wedding. I knew what happened. I know who dies. And I did my best to put it out of my mind.
Yeah.
Like all that stuff. Like I knew it was coming, but I was doing my best to just be in the show at the moment and ignore all the stuff that I already knew. And for the most part, I've been able to do it. But for now with season 8 looming over my head,
like you pretty much know exactly what's going to happen the entire season, basically. Right?
Yeah, because I'm caught up with it now.
Yeah.
And because like the other stuff, like I've heard in passing, like, oh, the Red Wedding was so bad, oh, everybody dies, blah blah blah. And as it's coming up, I'm like, all right, the Red Wedding happens and a bunch of people die. That's fine. I'm all right. But now it's, oh, season 8, this happens, blah blah blah. And now I'm like, oh, now I'm here.
Like now you're at the end game. You're in the end game now.
I'm in the end game now. And there's still people yelling online about it. Like,
yes.
So I'm still looking forward to it. I've enjoyed pretty much all of the show so far. I can't really complain too much about it.
Okay. Cool beans. Yeah, that's you're taking the first 7 seasons of Game of Thrones. And who knows, maybe we'll do like a bonus episode once you finally finish season 8. And
I'll just tag along on somewhere.
Get your perspective there, yeah. But all right, and you got some other discussions to talk about, Kyle?
Yes, I watched the other 2 John Wick movies. I went to, it's much like the last podcast I was on. I watched the other 2 of a franchise.
Oh, yes, you watched the first 2 Hellboys, and now you're watching the first 2 John Wicks.
Exactly.
Yeah, and we should say you've seen the first 2 John Wicks a couple of times.
Yes, I've seen them both. I think I saw John Wick 1 2 or 3 times, and I've seen John Wick 2 maybe only once.
No, yeah, actually, you know what? Yeah, I think you might only. Not that I would know everything in your life. But
yeah,
I remember you were supposed to go see it with me opening night, and then you couldn't because I think it was your fiance's birthday or something. So
something like that.
You probably made the right choice, but you didn't.
Probably. But we went and saw it like 2 weeks later.
But then then I saw it opening night, and then I saw it again with you 2 weeks later. So yeah.
Yeah, but that one only just came out a couple years ago, so it was still pretty fresh.
Yeah.
And the weeks leading up to because I went to the Alamo Draft House in Yonkers with 2 friends of mine,
right.
And the weeks leading up to it, I was just like, man, I really want to watch John Wick before I go see John Wick.
Right. So I don't think you actually said what it is, but you went to a John Wick triple feature.
Yes.
At the Alamo Draft House. So this was John Wick 1, John Wick 2, and then leading into the premiere of John Wick 3.
Yes, and as you know, the Draft House does some fun stuff before. They have like a little pre-show.
Right.
And unfortunately, we got there pretty late, but we were able to catch a little bit of the stuff that they were showing.
Okay.
And they showed a trailer for a movie called Hard Boiled.
Yeah.
You ever heard of that before?
Dude, Hard Boiled's amazing.
Yeah.
You ever seen fucking Hard Boiled?
You ever heard of it?
Yeah.
I was watching it, and I thought to myself the whole time that it looked very familiar. The shootout scene I think it's in a restaurant. I think I've seen that scene before somewhere, or I've played it in a video game somewhere.
You should. Your homework after this podcast is to go watch Hard Boiled because it's amazing.
I'll watch it after I finish season 8 of Game of Thrones. But
I mean, Hard Boiled's better, so you should watch Hard Boiled first.
But they also showed a scene from a movie called Righting Wrongs.
Okay.
Which is another, I'm assuming, Japanese action movie, and it was a scene in a parking garage where it's a guy versus a bunch of cars. It was like maybe 5 or 6 minutes of cars crashing into each other, him jumping over the cars, and then after a couple minutes, everyone gets out of the cars, and it's just a big, brutal fight scene.
Yeah.
And it was definitely something that I could see where John Wick was taking inspiration from.
Cool.
And in the trailer for Hard Boiled, like you could see the influence it's had on John Wick. And it was really cool to see that stuff. But then the movie started, and John Wick 1 is still an incredible movie. I have no complaints about that movie at all. It is just like the perfect action movie.
Correct. There's nothing else to add.
Yes.
And then John Wick 2 is moving swiftly along. For whatever reason, I remembered more of John Wick 1 than I did of John Wick 2, probably because I've seen it more.
Maybe.
But I remembered specifically the catacombs scene in John Wick 2. And I remember that being an amazing like shootout action set piece. And like the whole movie, it's fucking running on all cylinders from the very beginning.
Yes. And
it's just an amazing time, and just I can't sing praises high enough. But one scene that I forgot about was the shootout in the like Hall of Mirrors or whatever that was.
That's like the end of the movie. That's the
it's about at the end of the movie.
Yeah,
and
the end of the dragon sequence.
Yeah, it was. Oh man,
yeah,
that was such a visually striking scene. Just it was. Again, these movies kind of leave me speechless. It's hard to talk about them because I just don't know what to say that will just like do it justice.
I guess that makes you a great guest for a John Wick podcast.
It does, right? These movies are really good. Like I don't know what you want me to say, but seeing them both ahead of John Wick 3, I thought was really beneficial, and seeing them on the big screen again is in and of itself very fun. But right ahead of John Wick 3, because these movies only take place over the course of like
a couple of weeks. Yeah,
like 2 or 3 weeks. And not to jump the gun, but like John Wick 3 picks up immediately.
Yeah,
and
right
seeing it go from 2 to 3 on the big screen was like, oh fuck, like we're still in it. It's still going.
Yes, it's great. I mean, yeah, I also rewatched John Wick 1 and 2, not in a theater, unfortunately. I was actually the one who told you about the John Wick triple feature at the Alamo Draft House because I couldn't go and I needed somebody there just to represent me.
Yes, and I did the best I could.
Did they do any like games or anything in between? Sometimes they do that kind of like trivia stuff or anything like that in the.
Nope, they just fucking played them. It just straight through, and I personally think it was better like that because like I was saying, since they take place immediately after each other, they didn't really have anything to break them up except a 15-minute intermission for people to go use the bathroom.
Okay, fair enough.
And just the extra media in between, I think, would have detracted from it a little bit.
Fair enough. But yeah, I rewatched the first two again, and I hadn't seen the first one in a couple of years actually. The second one I saw the second one twice in theaters, and I don't think I'd actually watched it in full since then. But it used to play on HBO a lot when, like maybe like a year or so after it came out, and so like every once in a while I would just turn on HBO and John Wick Chapter 2 would be on. And I'd be like, oh, I'll watch this for a half hour, kind of thing. Like it would just be like a thing that I would watch like at any given time, and it was great. I missed those days, but I rewatched John Wick 1 and 2, and they're both basically perfect action movies. I mean, the first one especially, I was kind of struck by how like lean that movie is.
Oh, yeah.
Where compared to the second and third one, which feel way more expansive with the mythology and everything like that, the first one like obviously has the mythology, like it introduces the Continental and stuff like that, but it's really just like a straightforward revenge story. Man kills dog, John Wick kills man who kills dog, and that's the movie basically. And it's really incredible on that front and economical. But then John Wick Chapter 2 just expands the world in such a fascinating way, and the action's incredible in both of them. And I remember when I saw John Wick 2 in theaters. The first time I saw it, that opening night, I was like actively. I was shocked when the movie ended because I felt like a half hour had passed.
Yeah,
like from the time the movie began to the time it ended, like I could have sworn like 30 minutes had gone by. It was the full 2-hour movie, but I could have sworn 30 minutes had gone by. And also, I was shocked at where it ended. I wasn't expecting a cliffhanger ending. I wasn't expecting that to be the case. And so when it ended, I was like, no, but how could there not be more of this? How could I? And so I had to wait 2 years for John Wick Chapter 3. But I think it was worth the wait. But before we get into that, Mike, you also rewatched John Wick 2, right?
Yeah. I have seen John Wick 1, countless times by this point, so I figured I had a good enough handle on that one I could afford to skip it, for my rewatch. And I hadn't seen Chapter 2, I don't think, since theaters, since it came out. I might have done that same thing on HBO where you're like, oh yeah, I'll watch 20 minutes or half an hour or whatever of this. And
watching Keanu and Common have their little pew pew gunfight in the
most passive aggressive gunfight of all time.
That's the best.
Yes.
Where they roll down the stairs for 2 minutes.
Yes,
that was great too.
So good. And then I forgot how fucking great Chapter 2 is. I thought my memory of it was kind of like, oh, maybe I didn't like it that much because I had never gone out of my way to see it again. See it in full. So I rewatched it and just like, wow, it's so fucking good. I couldn't believe it. I'm glad I did, and it has a lot of the story beats that you need for Chapter 3 to have full effect, I think.
Yes.
So definitely worth it, and just like I want more Keanu in my life.
Definitely, and I think we're in a Keanu-sance right now, guys. We kind of had that when John Wick first came out. It was like this kind of big comeback movie, and then he kind of laid low. Like he popped up in a couple of indies. He was in the Neon Demon, The Bad Batch, but then he was in John Wick 2, still a big deal. But now 2019, he's got John Wick 3, and he's in Toy Story 4.
That's right.
There's a rumor going around, and I told Kyle about this. There's a rumor going around that he might pop up in Hobbs and Shaw.
Oh God, please!
Which, like, if that happens, like, I will scream in the movie theater. Like, you have my, like, even if it's just like a post-credit scene or whatever for like setting him up for the next one or whatever. Like, I don't care. Like, I will full on scream at the movie theater. But then of course they've also got Bill and Ted 3 coming out next year. Which is pretty insane too. So yeah, we are in a Keanu-sance right now, guys, and it's looking good. I'm happy about it.
I'm all about it
because I genuinely believe, especially after watching John Wick 3 and rewatching the first two, Keanu Reeves, one of the greatest action stars of all time, just straight up, like all-time action star. Like, if there was a Mount Rushmore of action stars, I think it would be like him, Jackie Chan, Schwarzenegger, maybe, and Bruce Lee, maybe. That probably my big four, like,
yeah.
You know? But yeah, it's just, he's so good. He's so good. And yeah, he really, like, he holds these John Wick movies together, and it's his commitment that makes them work so well. And I think we've said all we can really say about John Wick before we get into our feature review of John Wick 3. So I guess maybe we should just move on into that. Right?
Sounds good to me.
All right, let's do that. Let's move on into our featured review of John Wick Chapter 3, Parabellum.
You have no idea what's coming.
Mr. Wick broke the rules. I trust you understand the repercussions if he survives.
John Wick, excommunicado, is now in effect. You shouldn't be here. Nice suit.
Good to see you, too. I need your help.
After this, we are less than even.
There's no escape for you. The High Table wants your life.
Would you help set the mood for our new guest?
Let us begin.
Our services still off limits to me. What do you need? Guns. Lots of guns.
All right, that was from the trailer for John Wick Chapter 3, Parabellum, the new movie written by Derek Kolstad, Shay Hatten, Chris Collins, and Mark Abrams, and directed by Chad Stahelski. It stars Keanu Reeves, Halle Berry, Lawrence Fishburne, Mark Dacascos, Asia Kate Dillon, Lance Reddick, Angelica Houston, and Ian McShane, among others. And the IMDb plot synopsis for John Wick Chapter 3 reads, Super assassin John Wick is on the run after killing a member of the International Assassins Guild, and with a $14 million price tag on his head, he is the target of hitmen and women everywhere. So obviously, we're pretty big fans of John Wick here on this podcast.
I think we made that a little clear.
A little clear. And this is another John Wick movie, and it's pretty fucking great.
Yeah.
I think we're all in agreement on that. But yeah, so this movie takes place literally like minutes after John Wick 2 leaves off.
That's so cool. Like,
yes, I mean, I love that about it. It's kind of like the Back to the Future thing, where it's like every Back to the Future sequel takes place right after the previous one. It's the same with John Wick now.
John Wick to the Future.
It's exactly the same.
It's exactly the same.
They're the same movies.
They're the same movie. If you think about it long enough, they're the same.
I'm glad you pointed that out.
Yeah. So, Kyle, let's start with you. Your overall thoughts on John Wick Chapter 3.
From start to finish, my mouth was just agape. Like, from the get-go, I just was locked in, and I don't think there was one thing that I didn't like about this movie. Like, if you strapped me to a chair and said, you can't leave till you say something you don't like about John Wick 3, I'm like, can you get me a glass of water? I can fucking be here for a while. It was just so goddamn good.
I agree.
Fair enough.
It's a total blast.
All right, yeah, Mike, what's your overall take?
Yeah, it's impressive that these movies are effectively the same thing 3 times in a row, and I don't mean plot-wise. I just mean like or like story beat-wise. I just mean it's John Wick, Keanu Reeves enters a room, kills everybody, and then do that for 2 hours 3 times in a row, and I still fucking am engaged with every second of this movie. It's outrageous that this works, and that I can just, still be like, excited and hyped for the same exact thing. and you know, they're creative within that a bit. This one starts introducing a lot more knife play, which is cool.
Yes.
Compared to the other two movies. Because I feel like, you know, I was kind of nervous. I was like, how many times can we see like a cool reload kill shot thing or with the shotgun before it loses its effect? Turns out we haven't hit that point yet. But they broaden the scope a little bit with, like, you know, what kind of stuff is being used by John Wick. And of course, you know, the big draw is the action directing, like the stunt coordination and stuff with these movies.
Yeah.
It's insane to think about that this kind of, like, John Wick 1, I mean, I feel like might have been a sleeper hit in that, or maybe not sleeper hit, like surprise hit, maybe, where like
I would say surprise. It was kind of a sleeper hit too. Yeah, it was definitely. It made money. It was critically received. It was well received. It was good enough to get a sequel, kind of thing.
But kind of came out of nowhere is sort of what I mean. I think.
Right. I think people who are big Keanu Reeves fans like us were looking forward to it because it was positioned as like this kind of big comeback movie for Keanu. Even in the trailer, the big line in the trailer was, "Yeah, I'm thinking I'm back."
Right.
You know, so it's kind of like this big comeback movie for Keanu Reeves, but like outside of like the cult of Keanu that we find ourselves in, you know, the outside world really wasn't like that excited for John Wick, as far as I know.
Yeah, I think I'm going to agree with you because that's kind of my perception of it, also. But like for that movie to come out and basically revolutionize the way action films are made now, or shot, at least, is pretty impressive. And for it to keep doing that and keep being like on the bleeding edge of that stuff, whereas, you know, we're going to have long takes, you know, kind of medium shots. You're going to be able to see what's actually happening, who's doing what, who's where, instead of that kind of Taken era of just quick, you know, 15 cuts in 10 seconds or whatever it was when he's jumping the fence in Taken 3. You know, that kind of thing. And it just looks so fucking cool, and it's so stylized and beautifully lit, and just everything. It's impressive for these kind of like what could be just like a schlocky action movie to be so beautifully like crafted with all these movies. And that's it. It's John Wick 3, man.
Yeah, I mean, I think the Taken comparison is actually a really good one because I think in terms of influence, that first John Wick has become like, I feel like when it first came out, we didn't realize how big of an influence John Wick was going to have.
Right.
But, like, you know, when Taken came out, and it was a big hit, like, Taken came out, and it was, like, this, you know, massive thing, you know, the Liam Neeson, like, you know, I will find you and I will kill you, all that stuff, like, that became, like, an iconic line and everything like that. And, you know, and then you had a million movies after that trying to be the next Taken, right? We've covered a few of them on the Nicolas Cage podcast.
The dad action genre.
Yes. Like the older action star who's, like, coming in hot and, like, you know, gotta get revenge for these reasons or whatever. And John Wick, in a way, is kind of in that same vein. Like, that John Wick is probably exists because of Taken. Like, taking this older action star, which, I mean, Keanu was, like, 50 or whatever. He's not, like, super old, but he's, like, for an action star, that's kind of up there. That's pretty older. You know, I mean, I think at this point it's weird because I think all of our best action stars currently are older, it seems like. You know, with Keanu Reeves and Tom Cruise and really those two. But, you know, but it seems like we don't have like a huge supply of new action stars. You know, it seems like generally speaking we're relying on the same older guys. But anyway, so John Wick kind of started off as this kind of Taken knockoff, became its own thing, and it wasn't as big of a hit as Taken was. But I think became a big hit just through word of mouth and home video. And then John Wick 2 was an even bigger hit than John Wick was. And now John Wick 3 is an even bigger hit than John Wick 2 was. I mean, they're all making like way more money than the previous movie made. Because people keep like sharing, like just the word of mouth is spreading, and people who are into action movies are getting really into them. And it's really cool to see like how much this franchise has grown in just the 5 years since the original John Wick came out. And how many movies since then have become like John Wick knockoffs, right? They're like, just last year we had Upgrade and Hotel Artemis. Taraji P. Henson had her John Wick movie. There was Atomic Blonde, which was from one of the co-directors of John Wick.
Right.
You know, it's really cool to see how that, like, you know, it used to be everybody wanted their own Taken, and now everybody wants their own John Wick. And I think it's better for movies in general for them
absolutely
to try to ape John Wick, because you get
if you're gonna knock off a movie, knock off the better movie.
Exactly.
It is interesting. Like they just distill that plot down in John Wick 1 to just 10 minutes of setup, and that's it. Maybe 15 minutes of just they killed his dog, they stole his car, and like that's all you need.
I mean, watching it again, that movie is, if it's not an action scene, and it's like 80% action scenes. If it's not an action scene, then the rest of the movie is people talking about how great John Wick is. That's like,
Yes.
And I think that's a lot of the fun, too, is just like the way, I think, as far as all three movies go, I think the original movie with Michael Nickfus as the villain, I think he sells that the best, where he just has so much fun saying, like, just describing the stories of John Wick and how he's the Baba Yaga, and he has that one scene where he's like sitting by the fireplace and singing like a Russian lullaby to himself about the Baba Yaga, and it's like it's so great.
What is it? My favorite part in John Wick, well, maybe not my favorite part, but one of my favorite part from him is when he gets the call from the car guy.
John Leguizamo.
John Leguizamo.
Yeah.
And he's like, I heard you hit my son. He's like, yeah, well, he stole John Wick's car. And he just goes, oh. He hangs up the phone.
Yes,
it's like, that's
best.
pretty much all you need to know.
It's the best in cinema history. It's great. But yeah, all that is a long way to say that, yes, I thought John Wick 3 was also awesome. The fight choreography still kicks ass. It's pretty much unparalleled among American action movies today, and just everybody in the cast is fully committed to the insanity of the John Wick movies, and that's what really helps it. Because, I mean, each movie has had, like, there are people who pop up in every movie, like Ian McShane and Lance Reddick. John Leguizamo was in the first two. He's not in this one. But every movie also has a very distinct cast all of their own with, like, really awesome actors just in there. Like, the first one has Willem Dafoe, and it has Dean Winters. And the second one has Common, and it has Ruby Rose. And
Lawrence Fishburne.
Lawrence Fishburne pops up in 2 and now in 3 as well. And Lawrence Fishburne, by the way, probably my favorite character in all these movies. I love him.
He's fantastic.
I love him so much. He is having the time of his life. As that character. There's the one, I was actually there at New York Comic Con for the panel for John Wick Chapter 2 a few months before that came out. And it was when they premiered the trailer for that movie, too. So it was the world premiere of the John Wick Chapter 2 trailer. And at that time, nobody knew that Lawrence Fishburne was in the movie. It was revealed in the trailer. And it was revealed at that panel at John Wick Chapter 2 and Keanu was in the audience, and Keanu was on stage, he wasn't in the audience. That would be incredible if he was in the audience. Keanu Reeves was sitting right next to me, and he was like, hey, by the way.
Hey, get ready.
Check this out.
Keanu was there, Ian McShane was there, Common was there. It was awesome. And they premiered the trailer for John Wick Chapter 2, and towards the end of that trailer, you hear Lawrence Fishburne go, John Wick. The man, the myth, the legend, and I was like, I know that voice. Like, where do I know that voice from? And then Lawrence Fishburne comes out of the shadows, and I like the entire theater. This was in Madison Square Garden. Freaked the fuck out, and it was incredible. And then Lawrence Fishburne then the movie actually came out, and Lawrence Fishburne did not disappoint. He's having so much fun. Just the way he says John Wick's name is it's so much fun to me, and he delivers again here too. But yeah, John Wick 3 has. Angelica Houston's in this movie. Jason Mantzoukas pops up for a bit as the TikTok man. Halle Berry in this movie, who, by the way, is incredible.
Yes. She kicks so much ass in this movie.
I want a Halle Berry spinoff. Like, I genuinely do.
I'm about it.
This is the one franchise where I might genuinely want to spin off into a cinematic universe.
I get that, and I get the appeal behind that. But at the same time, I appreciate the restraint that they've had so far. They could easily do that. They've talked about doing that. They've talked about a spinoff called Ballerina, which would be about the Russian ballet type thing, and that's in this movie. And they've talked about doing a TV show on Starz called Continental and that kind of thing. But at the same time, I think part of what makes this mythology so interesting is that they really don't explain it at all. In these movies, they kind of just present it to you. You're on a journey with these characters that already know the mythology, and so you're kind of catching up on how everything works and how the rules of this world work as you see John Wick do certain things. And I think that's so much fun. The mythology these movies have built is so much fun. It's the kind of thing where it could go in pretty much any direction at this point, and you'd be on board. Nothing is too ridiculous at this point in the mythology. There's one point, and at the beginning of this movie, Keanu Reeves is running down the street, and he walks into a random cabin on the street, and he gives the guy a coin, and he's like, "Take me to the New York Public Library." And the guy's like, "Yes, John Wick." And
yes,
and it's that guy. Everybody in New York City is an assassin, or associated with assassins in some way, and they all know who John Wick is.
But even that, I do love. There's so much setup and payoff in these movies, and even in. John Wick Chapter 2, I only say this because I just rewatched it. In the very beginning, when he goes to the body shop that has the chop shop or whatever that has his car, it's taxis. The whole thing is full of taxi cabs where they have his car stolen or stored. Right. So it's that tracks in between movies. There's continuity around this insane mythology of who knows who and everything. And it's wow.
Yes,
it's incredible.
So good. So good. But yeah, the mythology's great. I will say I think this movie feels a little bit more bloated than the other two John Wick movies. I mean, the first one especially, which I said is a very lean movie compared to the sequels. But yeah, I think this one may have like one too many scenes of like guys monologuing at John Wick about the consequences of his actions.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like,
I can kind of get that.
By the time you get to like the fourth one of those, it's like, all right, we get we get it. Let's get back to the headshots here, people. But I was fully engaged. Like, the story is really interesting. Like, it just picks up where Chapter 2 leaves off and just runs with it. The action's blown me away, and it ends in a place that makes me yearn very badly for John Wick Chapter 4.
Oh, yeah.
And I got to wait 2 more years for it, and it's going to be painful.
Yeah. I do want to shout out, too, the Adjudicator, who's a very cool character. Played by Asia Kate. What's their last name?
Asia Kate Dillon, who is great, but I said this to Kyle as soon as I got out of the movie. It's like, did it seem like Carrie-Anne Moss should have been playing that role?
Yeah.
Oh,
I feel like
man.
I feel like the role was written for her, and she was like, nah. And they were like, all right.
I don't know if she said nah. I think she gets a lot. Like, I think she maybe just wasn't available or whatever. It wouldn't, like, we're speculating here entirely. Yeah. But it seemed like Carrie-Anne Moss would have been perfect for that role, and it would have like completed the Matrix reunion that they
the Trinity.
Do a Trinity, if you will, yes. But Asia Kate Dillon is great as the Adjudicator. Like, I don't want to take away from how good
she was
is.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
I've never seen someone more intimidating who only carries a cell phone. Like, that's their main weapon.
And always hold on to their gloves. Like, that's amazing. Yes. Yeah, well, I wanted to shout out because the Asia Kate Dillon is non-binary, and they like went out of their way to make the Adjudicator non-binary in the script. Apparently, there's a bunch of articles.
Only referred to as like they and them.
Yeah, which is awesome. And John Wick, like, as a universe, is very diverse and stuff. Like, just because everyone's a fucking assassin, apparently.
Because literally everybody in
when
the
everyone's an assassin, you have to be diverse.
Yeah, it's great. I love it.
But yeah, she was great though, and she brings like this great like villainous bureaucracy to the whole movie, and I love that. But again, Keanu, just the linchpin holding this whole thing together, and the full commitment that he brings to John Wick is what makes these movies work. I mean, I've seen like when I rewatched John Wick 1 and 2, I have them both on Blu-ray, and I was watching the Blu-ray special features, which by the way, the special features on those Blu-rays are really good. There's a lot of like I feel like in recent years, like outside of like boutique Blu-ray labels like Shout Factory or Finnegan Syndrome or whatever, like the special features on mainstream releases get kind of sidelined. Like, maybe you'll get a director's commentary or whatever, but that's basically it. But for the John Wick movies, they have like 10 featurettes on each disc that are like 15 minutes long a piece.
Wow.
Just about like how they did some of the stuff in the movie. Like some of them's about like Keanu's relationship with Chad Stahelski, who started off as Keanu's stuntman in The Matrix and has been working with him ever since. They have stuff about the fight choreography. There's like one on the John Wick 2 disc that's just an interview with the jiu-jitsu team that trained Keanu Reeves and how to do certain things. And like,
wow.
So it's really cool. You get a lot of behind-the-scenes stuff with the John Wick movies. And and watching those, you can just see the full-on commitment that Keanu has to this. I think they said he trained for like 6 months straight before John Wick 2. Before John Wick 2. I
100% believe that.
And that's that's like full 8-9 hour days, like every day of the week kind of thing. That's like a full on shit.
I remember seeing online. It may even be a featurette on one of the DVDs, but it was him at like a shooting range, and he had an instructor basically explaining to him like, if you're going to go into a room, this is how you have to enter the room. This is how you have to hold your gun. This is how you have to like check down hallways. And just like watching the way he moves, like he brings that to the movies. He's not just running in guns blazing. He's doing it like they would if he was a real assassin, like someone who is really like trained. He was trained to do this stuff.
Yes.
And I saw another video of Halle Berry at a shooting range, like doing the same stuff, and it was, like you said, they really commit to the movie, and that really helps sell it.
Absolutely, yeah. All right. Any other final thoughts about the spoiler-free stuff before we get on to the spoilers for John Wick Chapter 3? Which will mostly just be us describing action scenes, probably.
It's good. Go see it.
That's all.
All right, yeah. John Wick Chapter 3. It's good. Can't wait for John Wick 4, which has already been announced, coming in 2021.
Fuck yeah!
I do have one thing I want to say, because I forgot about it. Or it's interesting if you... I mean, I don't know if it's true. It feels this way, where Keanu / John Wick, because he's just is John Wick at this point. has been speaking less and less every movie. He's slowly becoming like the driver from Drive. Yeah, where he's just like not talking barely at all in this one. And I'm kind of like down with it. Like just the silent, brooding Keanu just murdering everybody.
The boogeyman.
Yeah. I mean, he is in all three movies. He's a man of few words, I think.
Yeah.
But then he makes those words count so well. I mean, there's just the way he says something like "yeah" and like that's it.
Yep.
Like it's perfect. It's so good.
Yeah, it's amazing.
All right, let's move on to the spoilers for John Wick Chapter 3, starting right now.
Stop it! Both of you! You're spoiling it! You're spoiling everything!
All right, spoilers for John Wick Chapter 3, Parabellum, starting right now. So, guys, the movie ends with John Wick seemingly falling to his death after Winston, Ian McShane, shoots him. But it's then revealed that he's brought to the Bowery King's lair, and we thought the Bowery King, Lawrence Fishburne, was dead by that point. And it appears they're going to war with the High Table, and goddamn it, just give me that movie right now.
That can make me wait 2 years for that.
It's exactly how I felt after I finished John Wick 2. I didn't feel like a half hour had passed this time. I felt like the appropriate amount of time had passed. But like, it just the feeling I had at the end of this movie, because I really thought this was going to be like the conclusion of the series kind of thing, you know what I mean? Or at least the conclusion of John Wick's story, and then maybe they'll expand on the Continental or whatever later down the line or whatever. You know, and I think, Mike, you saw this after they had already announced that John Wick 4 was happening. Mm-hmm. So you probably had some idea that it might end on some kind of cliffhanger, right?
You know, I didn't really think of... I wasn't expecting like an outright cliffhanger, but knowing how Chapter 2 ended, I probably should have been. But I knew it would end at least like with a hook for another movie.
Right, fair enough. So, I mean, Kyle, you were watching it in that big theater full of John Wick fans, I'm assuming, right? Because you went to that big triple feature of John Wick. Yeah. How did you react? How did your theater react to that ending?
An audible gasp when Ian McShane shot John Wick and he fell off the building.
Yes.
Because the fact that they showed him hit the ground, I knew, like, all right, he's not dead, but like...
There's no way he could be dead, but also...
There's no way he could be dead, but there's no way he could be alive. And then the adjudicator goes out and she's like, John Wick is no longer with us. And he's like, yes, that kind of makes sense. And it's like, no, his body's not there. And then you see Jason Mantzoukas just kind of wheeling him through the alleyways.
Yes.
And, oh man, just the ending when... Lawrence Fishburne is kind of monologuing at him, and he's just like on the ground, giving a thumbs up or whatever.
Yeah, he's like, "Are you pissed off, John?" And John's like, "Yeah." And then the movie ends, and you're like, "Fuck!"
Dude, that like chills us. Me too, John.
God.
Me too.
But like, I was like, as soon as like I realized the movie was ending at that time. Like once he was starting to get wheeled away, and like they get into the Bowery King's lair, and Lawrence Fishburne is just sitting on this like gigantic throne made of garbage. And it's like, and I was like cackling that entire time. I was like, I can't believe they're doing this. This is insane. But yeah, I love that. Mike, how did you react to the big cliffhanger ending?
I mean, it was great. I never want this to end ever. But I for sure thought he might actually be dead for a second, just because the way they show him fall and hit like this fire escape and they show him hit so much shit on the way down, and I was like, oh, this might finally be the thing. And then nope. He just exists on pure spite alone, and he's gonna just murder the High Table, and I can't fucking wait.
It's gonna be insane. And apparently, Keanu was saying like, they want to make more. It sounds like Keanu just wants to keep making them until like he can't anymore, basically.
Yeah, I remember seeing somewhere he's like, as long as people like him, I'll keep making them. And like, I keep fucking liking them. So.
Oh yeah, I mean that's the thing. But that's the thing. Like, once you go to the war with the High Table or whatever, it's like. I feel like Chapter 4 has to be the end. It almost feels like it has to be, but I don't know. We'll see. Chapter 4 could also end on a cliffhanger, and it'll just
he falls off another skyscraper.
Yeah, a bigger skyscraper.
He goes to kill.
They can't find his body.
But yeah, but right before that is the whole climax at the Continental, which is. Like one for the action movie history books. Like it's fucking incredible. Like we're already in the middle of like this epic shootout, right? That's happening there, and then we transition into John doing some hand-to-hand combat, and then two dudes from The Raid show up.
Yes, I was so hyped.
John Wick goes through so much fucking glass. It's like after like the fourth case that he went through, I'm like, they can't put him through anymore. And then he goes through like 9 more.
It's just one long shot where you see Keanu go through like 8 different glass panes.
It's amazing.
It's incredible. It's this movie's version of him falling down the stairs with Common, I think.
Yeah.
It's great.
They just had to one-up it.
And like the 2 dudes in the raid show up, and they're just excited to be fighting John Wick, and that's it's so cool.
Like they get the better of him. They could kill him, but they help him up.
Yeah, I love. Like they show up a little bit before that in Grand Central Station, and when they showed up, I was like, "Wait, is that Mad Dog? Like, what the fuck is happening here?" And then like they show, and then like once they leave Grand Central and they're not in the fight, I was like, "Oh man." Kind of expected a fight to break out with the guys from the raid. It seems like kind of disappointment that you get the raid guys in the movie and they're not going to fight. It's kind of like in Star Wars: The Force Awakens, a couple of guys from the raid showed up and they don't do any fighting, and it's like, and it's like, why'd you get the guys from the raid if they're not going to be in an action scene? But then the guys from the raid showed up at the end of the movie during the climax again, and all was right with the world because John Wick was fighting good guys from the raid. It's like, how is this happening?
And I love, so like I mentioned before, the setup and payoffs, right? In Chapter 1, they set up the pencil thing. And then in Chapter 2, they finally show him kill dudes with a pencil, and it's like, holy shit, it's insane. And earlier in Chapter 3, earlier in the movie, he goes to the Russian ballet guys, and they're like, take your belt off. You're like, what? That's weird. And then at the end of this, in that fight scene, he takes his belt off and fucking annihilates them with it. It's like, oh my god, yes.
Oh man, it's so good. And then from there, from the guys with the raid, then we have John fighting kind of the big bad of the movie, Mark Dacascos, Zero. And he's also just like a John Wick fanboy, which was great. Like he's doing his job. He's an assassin and he's fighting him and all that. But he's also just so excited to be fighting John Wick. They have that one scene when they're in the Continental earlier, and he's like, "Yo, man, just so you know, I'm so honored to be like fighting you. Like,
we're the
you
same.
haven't disappointed. Yeah, we're like the same guy." And it's great. It's so good. But yeah, that whole climax is incredible. But then you have like every other action scene in the movie, which like could have been the climax of any other movie, kind of thing.
What is it? I described it as I initially called it a knife fight, and then I had to call it a knives fight. I was describing it to a coworker, and he's like, "I don't understand what you're talking about." I'm like, "Go see it." Yes. But that whole sequence where it's just
knife
after knife.
Yeah, there's one point where like Keanu just throws like 8 knives at one guy, and it's great. But yeah, that whole knife fight that's incredible. That's the first big fight scene of the movie too. I mean, before that is the scene where he kills the guy with the book. Which was great,
gruesome,
and brutal. But then it kind of leads straight into the knife sequence, which is by the way, now that's like basically when he goes excommunicado, right? That's when the contract kicks in. And
actually, just before that fight scene, he goes to the doctor, who is the Keymaker from The Matrix.
Yes, and who's also the doctor in the first John Wick movie.
Yeah. So, but I love that he like works on him up until the last second.
Yes.
And then he's like, if they'll know I told you where the medicine was, so you're going to have to shoot me. And he gives him a gun. He's like, just make sure you don't hit anything. He shoots him. He's like, all right, maybe one more. Just like, don't hit this part. And he shoots him again.
Oh, man, it's great. But yeah, that whole knife fight sequence is incredible. It's one of those things, like, do you know the scene where, in Avengers Infinity War, when it looks like they kill Thanos and the Collector is in the background and he shouts, "Magnificent! Yeah. Magnificent!" And he starts clapping wildly. That was me in the theater during the night.
Yeah,
I believe that.
Yeah, I wondered, because these movies just brazenly, I don't want to say copy, but they wear their influences on their sleeves, right?
Yeah.
Chapter 2 starts with, is it a Harold Lloyd sequence?
I think that's a Harold Lloyd one, and that happens again in this one. You see a Buster Keaton thing in Times Square, which, because they're always playing Buster Keaton movies in Times Square,
obviously. But and then in Chapter 2 they do the drag out fight from They Live, but it's Common and Keanu, right? And this knives sequence sort of reminded me like of Oldboy a little bit, and I think it's just because it's in one hallway. Not that it's this long tracking shot like in Oldboy, and he doesn't have a hammer or anything like that. But
I can see that, yeah.
And it's a little more hand-to-hand combat than most of. Well, I mean, Chapter 3 in general is more hand-to-hand combat than the other ones. But I don't know. That's just the thing that stuck out to me. I was like, I wonder if that's like an Oldboy thing.
Yeah, I mean, there's as far as influences go, there's I think it was a Korean movie or maybe a Japanese movie that came out in 2017 called The Villainous, which has this big, epic motorcycle chase with a bunch of guys wielding katanas. And
Interesting.
And then John Wick Chapter 3 is like directly lifting that into here with that big motorcycle chase, which has katanas. But I think it goes even bigger than... I've not seen The Villainous, and I've heard it's great, and it's definitely like it's on my list now that like John Wick's come out, and like I can kind of trace it back to it. But yeah, the katanas and like just the one take shot from the front of the motorcycle where you're just watching John Wick just annihilate dudes in every single cyclist. Also incredible. I feel like this is going to be just like us saying, "Wow, that action scene was incredible!" Like the entire time we're in
But it was though, and that's the whole thing.
The bridge that they were on it's a real bridge in New York City, I think, and it's like a 2-tier bridge. So they were able to shut down the bottom half so they could actually use it.
Right.
And I think that just lends more to like the visual strikingness of it. Is that they're in a real location. They're really on this bridge. Everyone's really there.
Yes.
And it just feels even more like visceral.
Keanu's really killing people now.
He's really killing people with katanas and guns. Yes. It's amazing.
I gotta say, as somebody who left New York less than a year ago, these movies really make me miss New York. I don't know why, but I feel like I look at these movies and I'm like, man, I want to be in that assassin underworld.
And you know, it's like a weird connection to draw to all those exploitation movies I just watched. But you know, it kind of paints this picture of New York. Like all those exploitation movies are in New York in the 70s and 80s, and it's just everything's covered in graffiti, and everyone is in a street gang, and they're gonna just murder and mug everybody. It's like the updated version of that in John Wick, where it's this grimy. It's not grimy at all. It's like neon and clean and like sterile, but everyone's an assassin. I don't know. It's just a weird connection to make.
Yeah, definitely. We haven't even talked about the detour in Casablanca. Where John meets up with Halle Berry, who's playing Sophia, and they have the whole scene with Bronn from Game of Thrones.
Doing whatever he's doing.
Doing whatever he's doing. That's one of those scenes where I was mentioning before, like just guys monologuing about John Wick's consequences, kind of like just having this like a long scene. But then there's that great beat where he's like, I will adopt this dog from you, and she's like, no, and he shoots the dog, and she like kills him immediately. And then the dog ends up living because the dog has a bulletproof vest. But I think the best line in the movie is Halle Berry like looking at John saying, "He shot my dog," and John's like, "I get it."
He's like, "Trust me, don't."
That definitely got the biggest laugh in my theater.
Oh my god, it was incredible. And then there's that whole just escape from that compound with John Wick and Halle Berry and the 2 murder dogs that are running around. And the thing about that action sequence is you're not really following John Wick at all. You're mostly following Halle Berry that entire time. And that's the moment where I was like, yo, give Halle Berry her own movie. Like, she's kicking so much ass in this movie, and you know, if I would watch so many movies that were just Halle Berry and her murder dogs.
Yeah,
it's wild. It's an incredible sequence. A lot of it's done in one take, and it's just all that like, you know, hand-to-hand combat, the gun fu, and all that stuff. It's great, and you know, it's one of those things where like we already know that Keanu can do all this stuff. We're seeing him do plenty of this in the rest of the movie. Let's give Halle Berry like a 10-minute spotlight just to kick some ass.
Yeah.
You know,
and she fucking did. She was so great in that whole segment of the movie.
Yeah, and it's so weird. Like Halle Berry, I feel like, you know, as far as like franchise movies go, like she was Storm in the X-Men movies, and she was never used well. She was never used properly. Like even like she popped up in like Days of Future Past for I think I'm not even sure if she has any dialogue in that movie. Like she's just just there, you know. But now this feels like just a big spotlight moment for Halle Berry, and I hope somebody takes advantage of that, whether it's with a John Wick spinoff or some kind of other action movie thing that she can do, because she was awesome in this movie.
Yeah, and I love that, like, you know, we build on the mythology in that scene, in that sequence too, in Casablanca, where they have like the first coin minted and the first marker ever given and stuff. Like, I love that they kind of, I mean, that's one of the few times where these movies like stop and explain something a little bit. I mean, even that we don't get a full explanation, but it's like them kind of like, these are the origins of our group, and it's like, oh, all right. But it's still really cool and interesting, and Bronn's just like being Bronn. I'm glad he's a sellsword and just everything.
Yeah, pretty much. Also, guys, John Wick kills a guy with a horse. We haven't even mentioned that.
I think he kills like 3 guys, actually.
A couple of guys. He just like slaps the horse in the back, and the horse kicks the guy, and he's dead. It's great.
Oh my god. That made my whole theater go, ah! Like everyone just like, no one was ready for that. Like we watched him kill a guy with a book, and everyone's like, fuck yeah. And then a horse kicks a guy to death, and everyone's like, holy shit!
Oh, man, it's so good. Also, I mean, Mike, you mentioned that it kind of goes into the backstory of the markers and stuff like that. It also kind of very subtly goes into John Wick's actual backstory. But,
Yeah.
like, not in a way where it's like, let's pause and learn the origin of John Wick. It's not like, Hugo Stiglitz was not, like, it's not that. But it's all like relevant to the story, but it's just we're thrust into the history of these characters. John Wick seems to have spent at least some time of his life with the Russian ballet headed by Angelica Houston, right? And like that's like that whole group, and so everything about their conversation is about like John Wick's past, but they're never actually directly saying this is what happened in your past, John. And it's like, yes, I know. Thank you for telling me.
He says his real name apparently at one point.
Oh yeah, I forget what it was.
I remember her. She said it a couple times.
It's like similar to John, but it just has it's more.
It's the Ukrainian version of John. I don't know.
Yeah.
But she said it a couple times, and I'm like, that's John Wick. You're saying it wrong.
Well, he says it right. He says like I'm real name. I'm an orphan of the Belarus. Like I'm one of your tribe or something like that. And it's like, whoa, wait, hold on. We're getting actual backstory.
I know. Yeah, it's great. And I mean, the first two movies, like they always hint at, like that first movie where you see John in the shower and you just see tattoos all over his body of like all these different things that could mean a lot of different things, and like there's always hinting at that kind of stuff. And even this movie, like it kind of just gives you like a hint of it. It gives you like a little taste of like what John Wick's backstory could be, but it's never actually like, outright saying like, and this is what John Wick is like. You know?
It's kind of incredible that they're it's a masterclass in action and also a masterclass in world building in some ways.
It's so good. And I mean, so much of that credit goes to the stunt team, and so much of that credit goes to Chad Stahelski, who directed the movie, and again, who has been Keanu Reeves' stuntman since The Matrix. He's popped like they've worked together for so long. And Derek Kolstad, who's been writing these movies since the first one. They do such a good job of building these characters in this world together and just making it super badass. I mean, in the featurettes, they talk about making it. They wanted to have like a graphic novel type feel, like the feeling of like opening up like a crazy graphic novel, and like
I can definitely see that.
And I think they absolutely nail that in these movies, and it's pretty awesome. Also love that they tossed Lance Reddick into a fight scene this time around.
Thank God.
Which was cool.
Oh man, that was amazing.
Yeah, I mean, he spent the first two movies just behind a desk, and he's always been fun to watch. But it's just like it's just great to see him like just with a gun, like killing people in the Continental. That's great.
I really love the Matrix callback where Keanu is like, he's like, "What do you need?" He's like, "Guns, lots of guns."
Yep.
And then it's an amazing shootout. And it's intense and it's visually striking. And then he just goes back. He's like, I need a bigger gun.
Yes, and they got the armor-piercing shotgun bullets, and it's great. I saw somebody tweet, I forget who it was, but I saw somebody tweet about it. It's like, hey, question out there for anybody who's ever fired a handgun without any ear protection. Is John Wick deaf?
Yeah, probably.
And
the answer is yes.
He's just really good at reading lips.
Was it the scene where they fall into the pool? And he's like far enough away from the guy, and he tries to shoot him. You just see the bullets go, and he swims right up on the guy and shoots him in the neck a couple times.
Right.
Ugh.
Man,
for that moment, right. This is when like the high table, like elite troops are storming the Continental to kill them after whatever because of stuff. Which is basically all you need for these movies. And there's that moment where I think Ian McShane tells Lance Reddick, like, "Oh, I forget exactly what he says, but he flips the switches to change all the lighting, and it changes from like a regular lighting to like this kind of indirect, like strip lighting and stuff, like emergency lights, quote unquote." And I was like, "Oh yeah." Here we go. Like the movie just shows you like shit's about to go down, and they're gonna light it fucking cool, and it just looks so badass. And also, I'm glad too that whole sequence. I'm glad Baby Driver came out because it's sort of synced to the background like operatic ballet music. Some of the gunshots and like the grenades and stuff are not quite the way Baby Driver is literally synced.
Right. Which is like the whole point of Baby Driver too.
Right.
Yeah.
But this movie comes close. Some of it, or at least it's very choreographed to it in some way. Which is like, man, look at this movie going.
Yeah, it's awesome. It's awesome. Also, I mean, these movies do such a good job of establishing the rules of this world that, like, when the Continental becomes deconcentrated at the end, it's like a legit, like, gasp-worthy moment.
Yeah.
Like that moment where, like, the character is like, the Continental is deconsecrated, and it's like, oh no, like, and it's just her saying that. Like, it's not like
my initial reaction was like, that's bad. I don't know what that means, but it's bad.
Yeah.
And then we go to the Brazil section for 2 minutes, and which I love that these movies do that.
Right. Yeah, it's great. And I mean, and it really reminded me of the scene at the end of John Wick 2, where I mean, you have at the very end of the movie, like John Wick fought all those guys, and then he gets to the Continental, he finds Santino, and there's this big, and Ian McShane's like watching, like, John, what are you doing? And he just shoots him, like, immediately.
Yeah.
Like Santino's talking like mid-sentence, and John Wick just shoots him, and like that's such a big, it shouldn't be that big a moment, because it's like, John Wick's killed a lot of people in these movies already at that point. Like, we've already seen John Wick kill a lot of people, but like the fact that it's on continental grounds, it just feels like a big deal, because it is. Yeah. That's when we plays it up as a big deal, and they do such a good job of making it seem like a big deal. Which is great. Which I think goes all the way back to the first movie, where you have Adrian Palicki as the assassin who decides not to follow the Continental rules and try to kill John Wick, and then you see the consequences of her actions in that movie. But yeah, it's awesome. John Wick 3, it's very good, guys.
What a surprise,
But yeah, and let's speculate about John Wick 4 for a bit. What do you guys want to see in John Wick 4?
I don't know if this is going to be a controversial statement, but I want to see John Wick kill some people.
Wow, big if true.
I would like to see a couple of headshots if possible. Just throw it
maybe a couple stabs. I don't know.
Yeah.
No, I honestly I don't know where they can go from here. I know where they're going is
right.
The
they're
high
going
table.
to war with the high table, right? And
yeah.
We'll get to really see what that is. Which
but my brain can't fathom what that is, because the only glimpse we've seen of the high table is a dude in a tent in a desert.
Right, the elder, who's supposed to be like one step above the high table.
Right.
Yeah.
Which is what this movie kind of sets him up as, which is also interesting. But really, as far as the high table goes, we have the adjudicator who kind of represents them.
Right.
And then we have Santino at the end of John Wick 2 was on the high table because his sister was on the high table, and he had John Wick kill his sister so that he could be on the high table.
Yeah.
And that's really, we haven't actually seen who was on the high table outside of that.
I really hope it doesn't pull it just better not be like Sylvester Stallone and those
Arnold Schwarzenegger,
that era,
all the other old action guys.
I'll be so mad.
I very much doubt it'll be that. I'm thinking Hugo Weaving. That's my. Wouldn't that be fucking insane?
What if they're saving Carrie-Anne Moss for that?
I was about to say she might show up. I think that would be cool, having a female be the big bad in the next movie.
Yeah,
maybe.
But Hugo Weaving, holy shit!
No, I want Carrie-Anne Moss to show up as an ally to John Wick, so that the end of the movie can be Keanu Reeves, Lawrence Fishburne, and Carrie-Anne Moss fighting Hugo Weaving.
Oh my
Could you fucking imagine?
And also the Wachowskis are involved somehow.
This incredible masterclass in action movie making is just a really long Matrix joke.
What if at the end of the John Wick franchise, it's revealed that this is all a training simulation inside the Matrix?
I was just going to say that. We already got the Keymaker in there.
Yeah, the Keymaker's there.
He's
the John Wick franchise is a secret Matrix 4.
Yeah, we're gonna have Joe Pantoliano show up. We're gonna have the twins from the Highway Chase and the Matrix Reloaded.
It's gonna be crazy. Smith. It's gonna be wild.
Smith. Yes, it's gonna be great. Or just even go through all of Keanu's career. Have Winona Ryder show up. Have Sandra Bullock show up.
Oh my
god! Just Sandra Bullock rides in on a bus and is like, "Yeah, we're doing this."
That's her weapon of choice, is a bus.
I actually do. My actual serious hope for John Wick 4 is more team up stuff, because we don't really get it a whole lot. We get Halle Berry, Lance Reddick, kind of technically,
right,
not on the same level, but the Halle Berry stuff is amazing, and I would love to see Common or whoever, somebody come back, or a new character team up with John Wick and have that, because that'd be amazing.
Yeah, that would definitely be really cool. I want to see more cool cast members. If it happens to be Matrix people, that'd be cool.
Yeah.
I want to see much more of Jason Mantzoukas as TikTok Man.
Oh yeah. Absolutely.
Who really only has 1 or 2 lines in the movie. He just says TikTok, Mr. Wick at the beginning. And
yeah, but it's kind of cool though. But he, in an older episode of How Did This Get Made, he says, "I really want to be in the John Wick movies."
Does he really?
He just talks about how bad he wishes he was in those movies, and now he's in the fucking movies.
That's great. That's cool. But it sets him up to be in John Wick 4.
It does.
He's like Lawrence Fishburne's right hand man in this guy.
Yeah.
In this one,
the battery's still around.
Yeah, exactly. Which is cool. I mean, that was. Did you guys think he actually died when he? Yeah, I thought he actually died.
I did too.
When it seems like they kill him.
I wasn't entirely sure, because with Angelica Houston, she was maimed, but they didn't kill her.
Right.
So, but when they like slashed up Lawrence Fishburne, I was like, well, that seems a little more extreme. He might be dead.
Yeah, and he like falls face down in a pool of blood. So it's like,
Yes.
yeah, he's probably dead.
Right. So, but then he shows up at the end and he's just like heavily scarred.
Yeah.
But at the same time, like Keanu shouldn't have survived that either.
Yeah, that's true.
Like neither of them should have survived whatever happened to them. So like, I could buy that they both did.
Well, he's the boogeyman. He can survive anything. In the course of what 2-3 weeks, he's been shot, stabbed, fallen off a building.
Yep.
He's been put through the ringer, and he
lost
still,
a finger.
He lost a finger. Yeah. Was it? I remember seeing somewhere that the like producers or something really didn't want them to do that because they're like, it's going to be so much trouble editing out your finger for the rest of these fucking movies. So like, don't be surprised if John Wick's wearing a glove in John Wick 4.
That would actually be really funny. But yeah. Anyway, other thoughts about John Wick Chapter 3, guys, or should we wrap this up?
I think that's it.
It is just as good, if not better, than the other John Wick movies.
Hard
agree. What do you think? Yeah, hard agree. All right. Yeah, I think we're all in agreement that John Wick Chapter 3 is very good. It's a very good action movie. Can't wait for John Wick 4, which will be coming in 2 years. So yeah, we do have to wait for it a bit, but the important thing is we can rewatch John Wick's 1, 2, and 3 over and over again until
that
it's
is very true.
So there is that. All right, so I think that about wraps up our discussion on John Wick Chapter 3, Parabellum. And Kyle, unfortunately, you will be leaving us now.
Yeah, I haven't watched season 8 of Game of Thrones, so I can't and I can't join you guys in your little chit chat about this this season. So thank you for having me.
Of course, thank you for coming on. And if people want to find you online, you always say don't find me online, but if there is any reason people would want to, is there?
No. Like I said, when I'm ready for people to find me online, I'll let them.
Okay. There's no music or anything you want to put out into the world that that you want people to find.
Still working on stuff. It's coming. It's coming. Okay. Like the zombies in Game of Thrones. It's coming. Just wait. It's coming.
Music is coming.
And like the zombies from Game of Thrones, it'll be underwhelming when they do.
Oh, don't say that about Kyle.
You're absolutely right.
All right, Kyle, thanks so much for coming on, and
also get
like that was like the most vicious burn from my longest friend, like the person I've been friends with longer than anyone. Just shit on my whole life, and I appreciate you for it.
Come back anytime, you know.
Yeah,
thank you for having me, gentlemen.
Thank you for coming on, Kyle. All right, let's get into our discussion of Game of Thrones Season 8.
Bye-bye, motherfuckers.
They're coming. Our enemy doesn't tire. Doesn't stop. Doesn't feel.
I promise to fight for the living. I intend to keep that promise.
All right, that was from the trailer for Game of Thrones Season 8, the final season of the show, which just finished up on HBO about a week ago as of this recording. And we should preface this discussion by saying that this will be a spoiler-filled discussion. We're not doing like a spoiler-free, Game of Thrones thing, because like, what would be the point of that? It's like everybody, even if you don't watch Game of Thrones, you probably already know the broad strokes of what happened during the final season of Game of Thrones.
Yeah, pretty much.
So ironically, we're not going to be playing our spoiler bumper, which comes from Game of Thrones.
Yeah, look at that.
The first season, all the way back then.
We broke the wheel. We did it.
Yes, I broke the wheel indeed. Anyway, so this is just kind of be a freeform discussion about the final season of Game of Thrones. I don't have any notes written down or anything, like no talking points specifically. I just kind of want to get your take, Mike, because we were kind of talking about this a week ago when we recorded our Complete Works episode. We kind of had like a long, 20-minute discussion about Game of Thrones off the air, and we were like, man, we should have been recording this.
We made a mistake, basically.
We've made a huge mistake. But basically, Game of Thrones, the final season, it's over, it's done. This show has been such a huge pop culture phenomenon over the last few years in a way that very few TV shows get to be anymore, especially considering how fractured TV audiences have become over the last decade or so. And I'm curious, man, what were your thoughts on the final season of Game of Thrones?
Season 8, I think I ended up souring on it kind of a lot by the final episode.
Yeah.
Which sucks, dude. Because I liked season 1. Well, obviously. No, but I liked episode 1. I get, it's kind of the setup episode. We have to reestablish where everybody is, who knows who. It's reunion the episode, basically, which is fine. Episode 2 is a real return to form, I think. It's, characters actually talking to each other. There's, stuff happening. It's emotional moments, and I loved episode 2. Episode 3, Battle of Winterfell, for the most part, I liked how it ended. I'm totally down with the Arya kills the Night King twist. I believe that. There's lots of setup to, earlier in episode 1, she sneaks up on Jon in the Godswood, right? Arya sneaks up on him totally unnoticed, right? And what else was her training as an assassin for? So I'm down with that. It just, I don't know. It was kind of the moment where I was like, oh no, I don't know. Just because there's so much of the... Well, one, you couldn't see anything, because whatever the fuck they did, they lit it crap or whatever, or the compression.
That was a big complaint that I saw, that people couldn't actually see what happened in the episode because it was very dark, which, it was a battle that took place at night. I get that. But to me, that wasn't as much of an issue. I felt like I could see things relatively clearly. And it's not even like it's the first time this has happened with Game of Thrones. I feel like the Battle of Blackwater in Season 2, same deal. Shot in the dark, and it's, I think it depends on what kind of TV you're watching it on, what kind of, you're streaming. Because the way streaming works, it compresses the image and, it makes things maybe seem flatter or darker than they actually are.
Yeah.
So I get that was a problem with some people and, for some TVs, but I don't know. To me, that whole complaint, it just became, a shorthand way of saying, this season is bad because this episode was dark, kind of thing, After a while... If you've been following the conversation online, every complaint just kind of sounded like an echo chamber of people saying the same 5 things over and over again.
Yeah. I mean, personally for me, I had trails with the characters on that episode. People would move and there'd be 2 or 3 frames behind them and stuff.
Yeah.
Once the Night King blizzard shit kicked in, it was basically unwatchable because it's a large group of people and all of them have trails. So it's I don't know what's happening anymore. That was really unfortunate. And I was watching it on HBO through cable, a lot. It wasn't even streaming.
Wasn't even streaming. Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know. That was unfortunate. And but plot wise, I'm fine with what that went. Episode 4, I honestly don't even really remember what episode 4 is.
Episode 4 was mostly the aftermath of the Battle of Winterfell. They're all partying and stuff like that,
right?
And then it's kind of setting them up. The very end of the episode is Daenerys and her crew kind of going, and Euron kind of ambushes them as they shoot the dragon out of the sky and all that stuff.
Yeah, with the infamous... Daenerys kind of forgot about the Iron Fleet in the
honestly,
post-episode thing.
I think what made this season much worse was the post-episode discussions of it.
Yeah, if we didn't know any of their reasoning behind anything, you could forgive them maybe. Or well, they just were confused. But it's no, they did the shit on purpose. And no, that doesn't work. But anyway, this is a long-winded way of saying that this season... and, I'm fine with how it ended, episode 6, whatever. I'm fine that Bran's on the throne and all that stuff. I am just not totally sold on how we got there. And this season kind of just was we've got an outline of plot points that we know we have to hit. And we're going to hit them, and, whatever. Because, and then you hear the stories or whatever, rumors or whatever, that HBO offered them 2 more seasons, and Benioff and Weiss were we'll take 6 episodes, don't worry about it. And you kind of get the feeling that they were over it or whatever, or just ran out of story and however you want to interpret that. And that's how it feels. The writing is taking a noticeable drop. And I did love season 7, like you mentioned earlier. You like 6 and 7, which are the kind of book reader points where they're fuck this, I'm out. I haven't read the books, so whatever.
Right, because season 5 was the last season that was on book. Everything after that was past the books.
Yeah,
from what I understand.
Yes, as far as I understand too. So, there's a noticeable drop-off, according to them, when Martin's no longer involved, which just makes sense. But this season 8 just felt so, overview, if that makes sense. Like, it just feels like we got broad strokes of a plot. We're gonna the characters will say whatever they need to say specifically to advance us to that next bullet point of a plot, and that's kind of it. And we no longer have these long philosophical diatribes between Varys and Littlefinger. Grant, whatever their characters are gone by this point. But that kind of
Varys makes it almost to the end. He's like second to last episode is when he gets killed off.
That's true. But it loses that, right? It loses that kind of political philosophy juice by this season, and it's so weird to set up the Night King for 8 seasons, and then he's the B villain for some
right.
What? That's so weird.
I mean, I think the way the season is structured is what bugs me the most. Because I think you're right that maybe limiting season 7 and 8 to 7 episodes and 6 episodes each, probably not the right call for the story that they were trying to tell. And I think there is sort of a sense that Benioff and Weiss were like over it, but at the same time, like, I get it. It's one of those things when you look at the massive production that Game of Thrones is, that they have dedicated this entire past decade of their lives to doing. Like, I just watched HBO put out a documentary last night called Game of Thrones: The Last Watch, which is about the behind the scenes making of season 8. It's a really good documentary. If you're into Game of Thrones, if you're into like that kind of it's really like a fly on the wall look at just like all that kind of stuff, and it kind of takes you through every single person, like how everybody involved does like a certain thing that makes Game of Thrones what it is. Like, you just talk to the costume designer, you talk to the makeup person, you talk to like just the location scouter, and like people like in offices who are just kind of like figuring this shit out, and like all like just schedule, like you talk to the scheduler, the people who are like scheduling things, like,
right?
And like, that's a massive operation that has been going for 8 years with Benioff and Weiss at the head of it, and so I could see why they would be burnt out, honestly.
Oh yeah, for sure.
and so I feel like I'm a little more forgiving of them than the internet as a whole has been, because the internet only sees the final product. But at the same time, I think you're right that the full season orders would have probably served these a lot better. Or even just a change in leadership. If Benioff and Weiss wanted to leave, for example, and hand it off to somebody else, like Brian Cogman, who's been a writer on the show forever. He wrote episode 2 of this season, which I think we both agree is the best episode.
Yeah.
And he's somebody who is very passionate about Game of Thrones, has written some of the best episodes of the show. I think he would have been a perfect choice to take over the reins if Benioff and Weiss felt like they wanted to, peace out and head for Star Wars land.
Right.
Because that's
please fire them from that, though. But anyway.
But that's sort of the sense that I got, and I think that a lot of people were getting, is that maybe Benioff and Weiss just felt like I honestly think like they had the bullet points they had to hit, because George R.R. Martin wrote out, like, told them essentially what was going to happen at the end of the story, right? He told them, like, these are the kind of main things that I want to happen at the end of Game of Thrones. But the thing is, I don't think George R.R. Martin really knows how he's going to get there either. You know what I mean?
No, not at all.
I think he has an idea of where he wants things to go, but he doesn't actually know how he's going to get there, so he wasn't able to tell Benioff and Weiss how they have to get there. And they couldn't figure out how to get there either, because I'm guessing it would take probably years and years of more seasons of the show in order to get to the points that we get to in this final season, which is really the problem. Is that 6 episodes, not enough time to tell the story that you wanted to tell in this final season, especially because you're kind of it almost feels like you're taking just drastic turns from every single character and like making them into this, and it's like, this isn't how we think this character would behave, you know what I mean? And I think that's most evident with Daenerys and with Jaime. I think those are the two ones that I really felt that the most with. But like, everything that happens with their characters are things that I could see being the end game for those characters if we had a couple more seasons with them and like were able to actually explore that change with them. And instead, it just feels like, it just feels like a 180 that happens immediately, especially with Jaime. I think it's much worse with Jaime. Yeah, that's all in like episode 4, where it's like, like everything up to episode 4, Jaime's fine. Everything's doing fine. He's left King's Landing and stuff, and then he goes to episode 4 and he hooks up with Brienne, and like, that's not something I ever felt like I needed, but it was a kind of a fan servicey thing, and like, it was fine. But then like, within the same episode, he's like, well, I'm going back to King's Landing to be with Cersei. And it's like, well, the what? And honestly, like, I get the idea behind that, where it's like, despite the fact that Jaime has changed so much, he can't ever see himself as somebody who has changed that much. And like, he's a broken person and he feels like he needs to be near Cersei. That's fine. And I think that's a fine ending for that character. If there was like, 15 more beats between between that 10-minute span where he's like with Brienne. You know what I mean? Like, it just feels like there needs to be way more with that.
If the end of his character arc lasted more than 20 minutes on screen, because he had spent 8 seasons working up to the point where he's set, like Tyrion says, like he's going to stay in the North with Brienne. Well, he doesn't say with Brienne, but he's going to stay in the North and in Winterfell, and this is where he's going to be for now. And then, presumably with Brienne, but that's not the point of that conversation.
Sure.
And then he finds out that they're going to kill Cersei, right? My God, Sansa says, like, oh, I wanted to be there when they execute your sister, but I guess I'm not going to make it. And he has that moment where he realizes she's going to die, and he's like, fuck, I got to go. And it's like, but literally 20 minutes earlier, we established you're staying in the North, and this is what your character's going to be. If it had been another season of that, right? Like, or
even if it happened in the next episode.
Right.
And the fact that it's within the same episode, it's bad.
And it turns Brienne, right? Like, before that, the stalwart, finally knighted. She's Sarah Brienne, right? A stalwart lady of honor and all this stuff. Turns her into a sobbing maiden when he rides away. And it's like, you ruin Jaime's character arc, you undermine Brienne's character.
Right.
And I'm over that. And then, that's stupid.
Yeah. And then Brienne doesn't really have anything to do with the finale either. Her whole thing is just like she writes down Jaime's legacy, and that's it. And it's like, come on.
Which, if anything, this season has just had amazing memes come out of it, and at least we've got that, because some of those Brienne writing in the Kingsguard thing is like, just chef's kiss, perfect.
They're pretty great.
They're great. But anyway, so then, right, so I was kind of on board. Episode 5 is the battle in King's Landing, or the burning of King's Landing, or whatever you want to call it, where Daenerys has this moment, or has the turn where she becomes like Dany the Mad or whatever.
Yes.
And, for sure that's been foreshadowed, and for sure that's been on everyone's mind, I think, for a long time, where like, her father was the Mad King, or... All right, her father, father, I think, brother,
some Targaryen,
very close to her in lineage, is the Mad King that Jaime killed, and all this stuff, and whatever. It's definitely been there, but like the same thing with Jaime, like in the matter of one episode, or in the course of 5 episodes in this season, right, where all of a sudden that's on 11, and she hears the bells ring, and that's it. She's going to burn the whole city. It's like, okay, I guess. It didn't feel earned enough. It didn't feel organic enough. Whereas everything else in the show, for the most part, up until this season, basically has felt as an organic progression of character until now, where the characters just express lane to their endpoint, and it's like, oh, okay, cool.
Yeah, I mean, because that's the thing. I feel like with Daenerys, it's like, I like the idea of Daenerys being the ultimate villain of the series.
For sure.
The entire thing about Game of Thrones is that it's not like, one of the big appeals of the series and of the books is that it subverts your fantasy expectations, right? It's the guy in the first season who you think is the big fantasy hero who will save the day, dead at the end of the season, right? That's like, and that's like the whole thing. So it's like, with Daenerys, who has been positioned in this like heroic fashion, and she's kind of like the liberator of slaves and all that kind of stuff, and she gets to King's Landing and she completely annihilates it. And you've always had like hints of that, like you've had hints of the tyrant that she could potentially be. However, I think for the most part throughout the show, I think most of her actions have been viewed in a heroic light, I think, in terms of what the show has done. From what I understand, the books actually go a little bit deeper into her psychology and like what her thought process is, and like it hints more heavily at that she could potentially be kind of psycho. I think this season does some stuff setting up the fact that she's going to turn. But like, again, it has to be. It's not. It's 7 seasons of not doing that,
right?
And then a few episodes of doing that, and then suddenly she's there, kind of thing. It's like, I think it's in the first episode, like Daenerys shows up with Jorah, and she meets up with Samwell, and she's like, "Oh, by the way, I killed all your family. Bye."
Gotta go.
And that's like, oh, okay, that's a little fucked up on Daenerys' part, but like, I get it. Like, it was a pretty funny scene, like, and it was like funny, but like awkward, uncomfortable, and like in that way that like Game of Thrones can be funny. Like Game of Thrones is often a pretty funny show, which is part of what I like about it too. And that scene kind of played into that as well. But then you have like kind of throughout the season, you have like Dany learning that Jon's Targaryen also, and then I think really what it is, you have Jorah dying in the Battle of Winterfell, and then you have Missandei dying at the end of episode 4. And so basically, she's lost her best friend and her closest advisors, and like all this stuff. So I think the seeds are there for her heel turn in episode 5, where she decides to lay fire to King's Landing. But it's not enough, you know?
Yeah.
It's like
It's too sudden.
It's too sudden, and it just feels like, you know, 6 episodes wasn't enough to tell this story. It needed to be 10, or you needed to have been doing this earlier than just this season. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's real weird. But anyway, let's talk about the Battle of Winterfell, because you kind of mentioned that, like, yeah, it's filmed darkly, but I also think it happens like too early. It's one of those things where it's like, and we kind of alluded to this, where it's like the Night King shows up and they do the battle for an episode, and then by the end of the episode, he's dead. And it's like the White Walkers have been the threat from the beginning, right? Like the entire beginning of the show, they're this is the first shot of the show, right? Something like that.
Yeah, the cold open is the White Walkers.
Cold open, White Walkers, like that. They are the threat. Like every time we cut back to Jon Snow and whatever he's doing, everything he's always saying is like, the White Walkers are the real threat, you guys.
Yep.
And so theoretically, by all storytelling conventions, that should be the end of the show. The show,
yeah,
or at least have that factor into the stuff going on with Cersei and King's Landing, right? Like,
right.
I feel like the ideal version of this season of TV for me would have been like episodes 4 and 5 being like this convergence of the White Walkers, Cersei's army of King's Landing, and Daenerys and the Winterfell people, all kind of fighting each other at the same time, right? This kind of like 3-pronged battle happening at once. The battle should have been at King's Landing, probably, instead of Winterfell, and like that, and that could have been like 2 full episodes, maybe even 3 full episodes. And you know, it wouldn't have to be like nonstop battle sequences. You could have like, you know, cutaways to other characters doing other things or whatever, because not every character would be in the battle. Like you could have Arya trying to sneak around, doing crazy shit and all that stuff, whatever. But it just feels like that should have been like, it should have been this like big all out thing, and it was. Ish. I mean, the show, I think, it used to be much more character driven, and now it's much more spectacle driven, and that's fine. You know, it's like, I think you mentioned that there's like not really any political philosophizing going on in this season, and honestly, they haven't really been doing that for a couple seasons now, and and that's fine, because I think those. Like, I think season 6 is one of the best seasons of the show, honestly. It's so good. Just, you know, that has the Battle of the Bastards, and it has Cersei blowing up the church and all that stuff. It's great. It's so good. But yeah, I don't know. It feels like this season, it just fundamentally, I don't want to say they told the story wrong, but like...
But narratively, like, they didn't...
But it doesn't make any sense, you know?
Yeah, and it seems like, you know, in the end of, like, you know, like, I think you have a really good point, that if the post-episode, inside the episode things weren't there, we might have a better take on this better take on this season, because each one of those, Benioff and Weiss, say like, well, we just wanted to subvert your expectations, and like that can only get you so far before you get into like goofy shit. Where like, well, these ultimate bad guys, we subverted your expectations, they're not, and it's like that. Yeah. No, but now you've pulled the rug out from under us. Or, you know, like you spent 8 seasons setting up something only to subvert it, and like that seems like a fucking waste now. And
yeah,
I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think subversion of expectations can be a really good thing. And I think Game of Thrones built their reputation on that, honestly. Like I said, with the death of Ned Stark in season 1, which is one of the most shocking things I've ever seen in a TV show. Like, genuinely, like when I saw that for the first time, I was blown away, because I had no idea it was coming. Even though I watched season 1, I watched the first episode. It's weird. My history of Game of Thrones is this: I watched the first episode of Game of Thrones as it aired on TV, and I thought to myself, that was fine, and then I never watched it, and then I didn't watch. I thought the first episode was like, yeah, that was okay. It was like, it was solid. It was solid fantasy stuff. Maybe I'll watch the rest, and then I didn't. And then after the season had ended, I had heard that it gotten really good, and so I was like, okay, I'll give it a shot. And so I rewatched the first episode, and then I watched the full season. And honestly, I didn't really like the show that much until like episode 6. Like the first 5 episodes or whatever, like they were fine. I enjoyed them, but they weren't like, you know, something that I was like, you know, jonesing to watch. And then episode 6 is Khal Drogo kills Daenerys' brother, Viserys. And that was a surprise. It was something I didn't see coming, and I was like, oh shit, this character that I thought was going to be a big deal is not on the show anymore. This is interesting. And then the next episode, Robert Baratheon dies. And it's like, oh, shit, this character who also seemed like a big deal is also dead. He died off screen. This is getting weird. And then episode 9, Ned Stark dies, who I thought was the main character of the show.
Right.
And that was genuinely shocking. And I feel like Game of Thrones has been chasing that shock ever since. You know, it's one of those things where it's like, and I have never felt that level of shock since. I felt emotional watching Game of Thrones. Honestly, I think the most emotional I've ever gotten since then has been when Hodor died.
Oh,
that was
yeah.
It was beautiful.
For sure.
Also season 6, by the way.
Yeah.
Just throwing that out there. But even with, like, the Red Wedding, which, you know, I think that's where the show became as massively popular as it is today, because that's when you saw people online doing the Red Wedding reaction videos and stuff like that, and, you know, all that stuff.
Yeah.
Even the Red Wedding, when that aired, I was like, huh. All right, yeah, that sounds about right. It's based on what the show has done in the past, so yeah, that's great. Let's keep moving. I didn't like Robb Stark that much, so I was pretty okay with it.
I feel like Catelyn is the big death in that.
Catelyn is the big death in that, and I do miss Catelyn quite a bit. But,
and the show doesn't, apparently, because they never mention her ever in this season. Which somebody pointed out in the end of season 7. Right, that's when Littlefinger dies, and that which you know, that was a great moment, I thought. Right after that, there's the moment where Arya and Sansa are standing on the walls of Winterfell, lamenting how much they miss their father, and don't once ever mention Catelyn, you know, who is the character that had the relationship with Littlefinger, and is their mother, and they don't talk about her at all. And it's like they
thought about that.
Yeah, I forget what. I think it might have been Film School Rejects or something. Somebody had an article about, like, you know, why Game of Thrones doesn't mention her, or you know, points out all the instances where they probably should. Who was the moral backbone for you know, the first 3 seasons, and then basically vanishes for the rest of the show.
Well, vanishes because she's dead.
Well, yeah, but even like they talk about Ned all the time. Sure. They never talk about Catelyn again. And
that's interesting.
And I did, to your point too, I really did like season 6, and I feel like such a clown now. Because that moment when Cersei blows up the sept of Baelor? No, whatever. When she blows up the church.
Whatever it is.
Yeah. I fucking loved that moment, because that was the season, like the first off-book season, and they put all these extraneous plot lines into one room and kill all of them. And I was like, fuck yes. Because I was like, it became such a web, right? Like, it was getting too bloated. And I think that's what, you know, why it's been fucking a million years since Martin has released the next book. Like he wrote himself into a corner with all these threads that he can't neatly, like the show, coalesce into one satisfying ending.
Right.
But I loved that moment because it felt like a middle finger to Martin in that regard, where it was like, this is all the shit that we don't need anymore. We're here, we're streamlining it, and like, but I miss it now. Like where it ended up, or how it ended up, it's just like, where is that other stuff? The juice that made it fun. And it's weird to feel that way.
I agree. I mean, I think I love that moment too, and I think it's such a perfectly executed moment, which is what I love about it. Like, it's this big, long sequence, and it's cutting back and forth between the church and Cersei, and you have that like piano score from Ramin Djawadi, and like it feels. I think we talked about it on Film Bookcast when it aired back in the day, or like however many years ago that was. But I think I compared it to The Godfather back then, where it's like it very much feels like that church shootout scene in The Godfather, right?
The baptism,
the baptism scene, and it seems very heavily inspired by that, and it's so perfectly executed, and it's great. At the same time, ever since that moment, I feel like the world of Westeros has felt smaller and smaller with each subsequent episode of the show.
Yeah.
And I think partially that's because I mean, since season 6, you know, time between locations has drastically shortened, especially in season 8, where they're basically teleporting from Winterfell to King's Landing. I mean, I think if you're watching it, there's an understanding that like time has passed. Like, it's not, you know, I think it's just that we used to see the journey from, you know, if somebody was going to Winterfell from King's Landing or whatever, you would see that journey over a couple of episodes. Right?
Yeah.
Or you would see like somebody journeying from one place to another for like an entire season sometimes.
How long did Arya and the Hound travel? Right? Like,
that was an entire season. That was all of season 4, which, by the way, my favorite season of the show.
Yeah.
Season 4 is my favorite. That's the one with the Purple Wedding, where Joffrey dies. That's the one with the trial of Tyrion Lannister. That's the one with Oberyn Martell. That has Arya and the Hound. It's a great season. But the world itself has just, like, you know, we used to see that journey, and now we don't anymore. There's still an understanding, I think, that, like, you know, time passes. You know, when Jon goes out to Dany's island to visit Dany or whatever.
Yeah.
you know, we understand it's going to take a little while, but like the episode just jumps ahead to the moment where he shows up on the island because they don't have time to do that journey anymore.
Yeah.
Which is, you know, I think at the time when that was happening, we were both like, all right, like, yeah, let's get move on with the story. You know, now, like, because we were kind of in the same boat where it's like, I mean, I was still enjoying the show a lot.
Yeah.
But I know you were in the boat of like, okay, we got to start making shit happen now. I'm starting to get bored with the show kind of thing. And then season 6 happened and blew up all those extra plot lines. But now as a result, you're jumping around from place to place much quicker, and you got a lot less characters that you're working with, so it just feels like a smaller world than it used to be over these last couple of seasons.
Right. Yeah, it's interesting that as the number of characters dwindled, in theory, you would have more time to spend with them, but we don't. In Game of Thrones, there's less characters, but there's more stuff we have to do, so we have to move faster. And it's like, what? But I want to spend time now with Jon Snow now that he's only one of 10 instead of 50 characters. Like, right. You know what I mean? Like, I want to know some more stuff or whatever. I want to see more interactions. Yeah, and I think in season 7, they didn't, like, reference the time skips. Like, they would say, like, all right, we have to go to Dragonstone or whatever. And then, like, we're just...
And then they would be at Dragonstone.
Right.
Kind of thing, yeah.
And now in season 8, I did notice a couple times where they're like, oh, it's been a fortnight since we left. Like, they mentioned how long it took a couple times.
Yes.
So it's like, oh, I see you guys. I see you, Benioff boys.
You got to mention it, yeah.
Yeah, and I wonder, too, how much of this, you know, this kind of reaction to season 8 is just, like, pure, like, nothing can live up to the hype kind of thing.
Oh, I think it's definitely part of it.
And it was a year and a half. Like, that long wait, I think, hurt, too.
Yes, I think it was a long wait for only 6 episodes of the show.
Right.
And I think as leading into it, they were like, yeah, they're only 6 episodes, but they're going to be longer episodes.
Yeah,
right?
they'll be a feature length.
Which I will say, I mean, I was a little skeptical of that from the beginning. Because I've seen... You know, I used to watch shows on FX, and they and FX used to do a thing where it would be like, oh, here's a 75-minute episode of Justified or whatever, and they would always be worse than the normal episodes. You know, it would be that kind of thing where it was like, I think you have a structure, you have like the hour-long time limit to do whatever you want with, and I think a lot of TV writers are trained to work within that time limit, and then when you tack on like 10 or 15 extra minutes to the show, like the pacing gets askew. You know what I mean? The pacing gets messed up. That actually used to happen a lot. I don't watch the show anymore because it drove me insane, but The Walking Dead.
Who gives a shit about that show?
I would, like, there would become a time, like, in the later seasons of The Walking Dead where I would see an episode, realize that it was like an hour and a half long, and be like, nope. I would put it off for a couple days or whatever, and then I think actually... The reason I stopped watching the show is I was looking ahead, and I think I fell off like midway through season 8, and then the next episode was about to air, and I saw it was an hour and a half, and I was like, man, I don't have the energy for this anymore. But with Game of Thrones, I was like, you know, I'm excited about it. I like Game of Thrones, so I was like, you know, eager to see what they were going to do with that. And HBO is a little more free in terms of time constraints about what, you know, shows can do anyway. And I think pacing wise, most of the episodes were okay. It just felt like, you know, I think I would have rather had 10 60-minute episodes than, you know, 6 episodes that were all like between 60 and like, what was it, 60 and like 90 minutes or whatever?
Yeah, 80 something I think was the episode 3. It was the longest, but yeah, I don't know. It's just like kind of over it, and I'm glad it's done. And you know, well, okay. So here's the thing that pissed me off the most about season 8, and honestly, I can't believe it happened in episode 5. Literally, the second to last episode, I checked out of the show. I've never experienced something like this before.
Yes.
So it's the moment when Cersei dies, right? So this is the battle for King's Landing or whatever, and Jaime sneaks in, and he's going to help her escape. And they're in the catacombs or whatever, the dragon graveyard for some reason, under King's Landing. And the building collapses on them, and they die in each other's arms. And I was so incensed that the most evil character gets one of the simplest deaths in the whole show. Like, she is the ultimate villain. Right? She's more important to the story as a villain than the Night King, apparently.
That's how the show had positioned it at that point.
Yeah. And she gets to die instantly in the arms of the person she loves. And, like, fuck you. Fuck off. You can't do that. Like, fuck subverting expectations for that. Like, get out of here. That one, like, I was done. Like, at that point. And to the point where I even looked up the leaks for what happens in episode 6. Which, if you know me, if you've been following us at all, you know I'm unsullied, you know, don't, like, well, I guess...
Yeah, you're You're very spoiler averse.
Yes, yeah, it's weird to say that while talking about Game of Thrones. But yes, I go out of my way to avoid spoilers and trailers and stuff. So for me to go on go online and just be like, fuck it, like what's the plot of episode 6 is like unheard of and crazy.
Now, were the leaks accurate? Just out of curiosity.
Yeah, they were. I mean, I don't remember exactly if they hit everything, but it had basically the major plot points. It had that, Jon kills Dany, Bran becomes king, Tyrion goes on trial, quote unquote, and convinces them to elect Bran. The head who is the High Council at the end, all this stuff. So like it hit all the major plot points basically. I don't know if it had Sansa becoming Queen of the North, and I don't remember what it said for Arya, and that Jon takes the black at the end. So like it had basically everything.
Basically the entire thing.
Yeah, which I'm fine with. Like I said, like I'm basically fine with how it ended. Although ultimately I think Bran is the villain now, which is very weird, and nothing changed because all the people that were part of the previous power structure are still in power, and Bran, when becomes elected king, he says, like, well, why do you think I came all this way? As if it's like some hotshot thing, but it's like, wait, so you knew all these people were going to die, and you became in power, so you let it happen so you could get power, so therefore you're bad because you let a whole city of people get burninated so you could become king.
See, I think that's one interpretation of that moment. I would say I don't see it that way. I think Bran understands that like things have to happen. He like doesn't mess with the space-time continuum or whatever.
Yeah.
And that kind of thing. It's all destiny pre-written in the stars or however it works. I don't know. Bran's powers have never been that well defined to me.
Yeah, and how we invented that Raven machine.
Exactly. And really all Bran does this season is warg into shit and spout off one-liners. That's like his entire thing.
Yeah.
There's that one moment in the Battle of Winterfell where he's like, I'm going to warg into these ravens, and then they just kind of fly around and do nothing.
I'm going to go now. It's like the direct quote, and that's it.
Yes. Yeah. But that's really all he does. He just like kind of spouts one-liners at the one point where like Jaime's on trial in Winterfell, and Bran says something like, "Oh, the things I do for love," and like Jaime's like, "Ooh." But overall, I mean, the finale as a whole. What did you think of the final episode? Like, I mean, you knew the spoilers going in, but the final episode, like, you were basically satisfied with how it went down?
Pretty much, yeah. Like, I didn't not like anything. I wasn't in love with anything. Although I kind of think the Drogon melting the throne is dumb. I mean, so I like that he did it. It just doesn't make sense. Like, his dumb... Yes, it's the dumb version of how that happens. You know what I mean?
Drogon, with his dumb dragon brain, couldn't contemplate the the magnitude of what he was doing.
But, like, they're shown to be, like, human-like smartness at some points, and, like, they recognize people and stuff, you know? Like, they aren't just animals, even though in that moment he has... I don't know. Like, if it had been shown that he deliberately... or if it was unquestioning that he deliberately melted the throne, I would be more okay with it. But it's shown as, like, a moment of grief where he, like, lets out his fire, and he misses the throne, like, a bunch, and then accidentally hits the throne and melts it. And it was like, well, that's dumb.
I don't know. I was basically okay with that. I kind of had a feeling the show would end with the Iron Throne being melted down, like somehow. Like that to me, that's just like the question was always like, who will end up on the Iron Throne? But like to me, it was like the show kind of has to set it up. Like it's basically set it up where like nobody can be. You know? But yeah, I will say that the final episode was basically pretty solid. Like I think based on everything they had done this season and all the mistakes they had made leading up to it. I thought it was as good as it could potentially be, kind of thing. Yeah. I will say I think the choice for Bran to be the king is absurd. I think it makes no sense based on the way they set it up in the show. Because it's like, Bran is not a character. He's like, no. He's a character. Like, he exists in the show. But, like, he's so unimportant of a character, or so uninteresting of a character, that the show literally decided, hey, you know what? We're not even going to show Bran for a season, right? Like,
yeah, that's right.
I think it's season 5 or whatever. Bran's just not there. We don't check in on what he's doing at all because his stuff was boring.
Yep.
And so then at the end of the episode, or like in the midpoint of the episode, I guess Tyrion has this like big speech, and he's like, "Well, you know what? Stories are really the most powerful weapon in the
and he sits
in the
on
world."
A chair
and it's like,
backwards.
yeah. let's talk about stories, people. And it's like, oh wow, did a writer write this? Like, but it's Tyrion talking about stories, and it's like, and who has a better? And he's like doing this big build up, this lead in, and he's like, and who has a better story than? And I was like, Sansa. Like Sansa has the best story. Like Sansa should be the ruler. And it's like, and then he's like, Bran the Broken. And I was like, what the fuck? Like I audibly said that like when I was watching the episode, and then he goes in this whole thing about like Bran who overcame such adversity and like lost the use of his legs and became the warg thing and whatever. And Bran's like, yeah, haha, let's do it.
It's like I knew it was coming all along. Pew pew.
But like literally like. I think anybody else sitting there probably has a better story than Bran does. So it's like, by that logic,
Yeah.
I honestly, and I liked the way it ultimately ended with Sansa. Like, I think having her being Queen of the North and the independent state, like that's perfect. That's perfectly within character. That makes sense. I dig that. But I would have rather just have Sansa be the leader of everyone if that's going to be the case. Because then once you have the North being independent, then it's like, well, wouldn't like the Greyjoys also want that? And like, wouldn't like, like if everybody had the option to be independent, wouldn't they just do that?
Right?
Like, just especially the Greyjoys. It seemed like Yara Greyjoy was like watching that and being like, "Huh,
that's an
I didn't know we could. I didn't know we could do that. Wish I had known that before I said I." But all right.
Yeah, it's very weird. Like, it makes sense that like Yara would probably do that. Like Bronn, doesn't he seem like the kind of guy that would want to be? Well, actually, he ends up on the High Council, so I guess he's fine.
Yeah, that makes no sense to me either. I don't understand why.
If you really think about it, him or Davos actually won the Game of Thrones because they start as lowborn nothings and both end up on the High Council.
That's a good point.
And I want a sitcom of the High Council because that one scene is just like doing yucks, and I kind of loved it.
It's just a bunch of like disparate characters who really like don't have that much to do with each other from before that sequence.
Yeah,
right. It's like Tyrion, Davos, Sam, Bronn, and Brienne, right? Yeah, and that's a great sitcom right there. I would watch that show.
Just somebody did an edit with the Seinfeld bass thing over it.
Of course,
that's great.
Also, I mean, I do want to give a shout out. I mean, like again, I love the idea of Daenerys being the ultimate villain of the show. It's just that the show sped through that idea really quickly.
Yeah,
like that should have been a whole like if season 7 had ended with the thing of King's Landing with the fire and all that stuff, and Daenerys really going in the full heel turn, and then the entire final season was them trying to work under Daenerys' rule, but realizing that can't be done, and like having to deal with, like having to ultimately get to the point where you had to kill Daenerys, could have been cool. That would have been really interesting. Instead, we get like basically 20 minutes of Daenerys being like, "All right, and now we're going to conquer the world," and and to her credit, I think Emilia Clarke sells it really well. I think she does really good work throughout the season, even when she's kind of given like not the greatest stuff to do. With the exception of like the first episode where she has to be like love struck with Jon Snow, doing the like little dragon ride thing, which I like the scene, but like it felt weird to have her being like, go, I'm in love with you, Jon Snow. It just felt like odd because we've seen how like Daenerys acts around like dudes that she's boning, right? We've seen like Dario and stuff in the past. Like she doesn't act like that. That's not her. But like that final sequence with her like in front of her armies and like she's walking out and the dragon wings spread behind her, like that's a great shot.
That was amazing.
It's really cool, and like Emilia Clarke's selling it, and it's really good. And then she has that whole like monologue with Jon, and she kisses him and he stabs her, and that's the end of that. And it's like we. Like I wanted more than 20 minutes of that, I wanted a full season of Daenerys as tyrant if you're going to go that way,
Right. I think that's the thing is you could sum up season 8 with your quote of just I wanted more than 20 minutes of that. Like that's it. That's my whole complaint of every story beat. It's like I wanted that to last longer, and you gave me the Cliff Notes version instead.
Exactly. It really was the Cliff Notes version. So, I mean, as a whole, as a final season, kind of, ultimately it feels like an epilogue to me compared to like the rest of the show.
Yeah.
Which is weird considering all the conclusion stuff happens in this season. But, I mean, how do you think this compares to the show as a whole? Do you think, like, if you were to ever rewatch Game of Thrones, would this final season maybe like raise in your estimation by any chance? If you were like, because I mean, we were talking with Kyle before, and he was like, he hasn't watched the final season yet, but he's watched the entire show within the span of like 3 weeks. And I'm curious if we had watched it all at once, as opposed to watching it like year by year, how we would feel about it.
Yeah, I think it would probably fare better because season 8 would be better received watching it all at once, because you wouldn't have the time to build up all the hype in your mind. You wouldn't have to like painstakingly wait year and a half, but a year between seasons. And part of the whole fun, and you always talk about this, like being anti binge watching shows and stuff.
Yep.
Because you like to be able to talk about it and theorize and react and all this stuff.
Yep.
But all that just felt like so useless now, pointless for this show. Just the way it ended, or whatever. It felt all for naught, basically, for season 8.
Okay.
But that said, if you hadn't had the time to do all that, I think it would actually be like, okay, yeah, this is pretty cool. Like
if you weren't thinking about it at all,
if I hadn't taken 8 years of my life devoted to this show, it was following it, being on the subreddit, being on Twitter discussions with my friends, and all this stuff. If you just kind of like engaged on a surface level by the end, and I think that's the part of it too, is people have invested in this so much. And, for the book readers, I totally get it, from 1997 or 6 or whatever, when the first book came out. It's been that long, going on, dissecting every word and sentence and scene in this show and stuff. And, it kind of just pays off in the surface level version of it. It hurts, man.
Okay. I don't think it hurts. I mean the journey was still
for
worth
those
it,
people.
Yeah. And that's the thing. I feel like with TV shows, especially like big shows that have like big hyped up endings, the ending is almost always not as good as you might want it to be. And honestly, but I feel like with American TV shows, the journey is kind of the way, like the appeal of it to me. Like I got 7 very good seasons of Game of Thrones. I'm not. Not gonna. And honestly, like I feel we've criticized it a lot. I overall enjoyed season 8. Like I overall had a good time watching it. I didn't dislike the season. I had a lot of issues with it, but I enjoyed it. I think mostly because I'm invested in these characters and just want to see where they end up, kind of thing.
Yeah.
But ultimately, I enjoyed it. Honestly, I'm going to compare it to a very terrible series finale right now.
Oh, interesting.
But I think the mistakes that Game of Thrones makes are similar to the mistakes that this show made with its finale. And that show is How I Met Your Mother.
Wow.
Because here's the thing about How I Met Your Mother. It was a good show for a long time. I think the last couple seasons are iffy, but it was a good show for a while. And the final season was actually a really interesting experiment. It was like all taking place in 3 days at Barney and Robin's wedding. And then it was that introduced the mother and all that stuff, and it kind of brought the mother into the fold. And for the most part, season 9 as a whole, pretty solid. And then the finale is terrible. It's one of the worst series finales of all time, in my opinion. And the reason for that is because they had figured out the ending of the show around the time they were making season 2.
Oh,
and
no.
season 9 was the final season of How I Met Your Mother. So they had figured out what they wanted to do with the ending of the show, because How I Met Your Mother was also even though it was a sitcom, it was heavily based on these long running plot lines and this mythology they had built up over the course of years. And so they actually shot some stuff for the ending of the show while they were filming season 2.
Wow.
With Ted's kids, how that show is structured, where Ted's explaining how he met your mother to the kids. Have you watched How I Met Your Mother?
I mean, not like I didn't follow it. I've seen episodes of it.
Okay,
and stuff.
Gotcha. So they shot some stuff with the kids while they were making season 2, because they knew the kids would have aged 8 years by the time they got to the not that they knew how many seasons they were going to run. But they knew a few years down the line the kids are going to be older, and so it won't look the same. So they shot the stuff with the kids years before they actually had the final episode.
Right.
So they knew exactly what they were going to do with the finale. And the problem was that ending would have been good for if How I Met Your Mother had run for 3 seasons. But then How I Met Your Mother ended up running for 6 more after that. And so many different plots entered the show, and different characters developed in different ways. And then the finale just takes a giant shit on all of that and reverts everybody back to what they were in season 2 of the show or whatever, and destroys character relationships and all this stuff. And it's terrible. It's real bad. And Game of Thrones season 8, I don't think is as bad as that, but I think it shows the dangers of having your ending point figured out way too early. You know what I mean? Because it doesn't give the show enough time to grow organically from that stuff. Or it does grow organically, and then you're kind of stuck with the ending that you set out with originally, and then you kind of have to revert everything back to the way it was before everything grew or out of what was happening.
Yeah.
I think there's value in having an idea of where you want to go. But I think you also need to have to figure out, like, you know, you can change that as you're going, kind of thing. Especially because you're off book. Like, nobody was going to know if, you know, if you changed it.
Yeah, I think it was John Scalzi, I think, or some author, or Sam Sykes. I don't remember exactly who it was. Some, you know, Twitter active author, modern author. Wrote a little bit of a thread about it, and the shift from writing for character to writing for plot that the show had, where that's what happened, where, you know, say season 7, we start getting that, where, like, okay, we just got to hit these beats, these story beats. We know we got to get there, and the characters start behaving unintuitively or uncharacteristically from how they behaved prior to service the plot rather than the plot servicing the characters. And that's kind of seems like that, or that's what happens.
Yes.
That's where we get that.
Yeah, which is why, I mean, I think Breaking Bad, very satisfying series finale, I think. You know, you've seen the finale of Breaking Bad, right? Yeah. Breaking Bad's a very good finale, and I think, you know, if you've ever listened to, like, Vince Gilligan talk about his process of Breaking Bad, they had no idea what they were doing with that show.
Which is crazy.
Which is crazy. Yeah, like, they would start a season and have no idea where it was going to end up, kind of thing. And they would break it in the writer's room and, like, have discussions about it. But, like, you know, they would figure out, like, every season's single arc before they figured out the actual series arc, kind of thing. And that allowed Breaking Bad to kind of grow on its own, grow organically, and figure out, like, an actual interesting way to end the story. And yeah, Game of Thrones didn't really have that. And I think part of that is because they were adapting books that were already a thing. And then I think, honestly, a lot of the problem was they were kind of spinning their wheels for a little bit, waiting for George R.R. Martin to write that next book.
I think so, yeah.
And then he didn't.
Yeah.
And so they were like, oh, fuck, so now we got to accelerate through some stuff because we kind of killed some time. Because I remember season 5 was a really, like, that to me was the weakest Game of Thrones season, at least up until this one. And I'm not even sure if season 5 might even be worse than season 8. I just remember that's adapting in both books 4 and 5. The books 4 and 5 are like a weird situation where, like, nothing really happens in either of them, and they split the characters in both books, so, like, half the characters in one, half the characters in the other, kind of thing. So they kind of just put them together and, like, streamlined it, and it's still, like, it's fine. It's just not, like, it's not as good.
That's the whole, like, Faith Militant and, like, Sons of the Harpy plot lines, right, and stuff.
Yeah, that's the one that ends with the Cersei Walk of Shame, I think.
Right.
Going through the town, which is a good sequence.
Oh yeah,
I think.
You know, but a sequence befitting a villain.
Sure. Well, I think that's the sequence that ultimately makes her the actual villain.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because Cersei, I mean, up to that point, was a much more multidimensional character. Who is like had villainous tendencies? Don't get me wrong, but definitely like she felt like she had a lot more layers to her. And then I think at that point, that's kind of like the bells ringing, the bells ringing moment for her, kind of thing. Where it's like, all right, you know. And then season 6 is all about her getting her revenge against them,
right?
And then ultimately blowing up the church. And then I think season 6 even ends with, like, just her dressed in all black and taking the throne. And being, all right, she's like Cersei's power mad villain now, basically. But that's the thing. I think the difference is you get that journey with Cersei. Yeah, you don't get that with Daenerys. And I really wish you could have. I really wish that was there. Yeah. Otherwise, any other Game of Thrones things, Mike, or should we start wrapping this up?
No, I think we covered all of our feelings for the most part.
Okay. So yeah, season 8, Game of Thrones, the final season of the show. Yeah, I liked it. I ultimately enjoyed the show, even though we spent the last hour criticizing it to hell. But it's, you know, it's all out of love. You know, I think it's because it's a show that we invested a lot of time in.
Yeah.
We like these characters a lot, and we want. I think I ultimately enjoyed the final season. I just wanted it to be better, kind of thing.
I think I ultimately come out negative. I would have been neutral. I would have been like, yeah, it was fine if Cersei had gotten her comeuppance. Like, literally, that's the only point I'm gonna be like, no.
I mean, she does die. So
yeah, but the best death in the whole show. Like, the show that has the most brutal, like, deaths for all the people that she caused to die, right? Like, this show has the gruesome, drawn-out... Like, they fed Ramsay Bolton to his dogs. Like, you know? Like, which is a perfectly appropriate death for the way his character was a villain, right? And, like, Cersei gets an easy death in a show that is full of very hard deaths. And I'm not going to let it go for that.
Yeah, I mean, I will... Okay, I'll concede that. I think Cersei is much more important of a character, though, to have... Like, it's again, she was a much more layered character in the first, like, 4 or 5 seasons of the show.
For sure, yeah.
And so she wasn't, like, outright villainous, and so I feel like... I don't like the way her character died either, but it's not that I think it's too easy of a death for her. I think it's just... I don't know. It just feels anticlimactic, I guess.
Yeah,
in
maybe
in a certain way.
Maybe coupled with what they do to Jamie, where he reverts back to episode 1, season 1.
That's the worst thing.
Yeah,
yes,
maybe
sure.
it's those two together.
That's definitely worse. Okay, so I will say, I think the writing on the season and the way the story plays out, I think it's structured very oddly. I think some of it's very weird, and there's definitely moments where I'm like, man, that shouldn't have happened that way. But as far as the production of the show goes, like the production's still outstanding. It's still incredible to watch. I think the show is very well directed the entire season through. Miguel Sapochnik directed both battles, the Battle of Winterfell and the Battle of King's Landing. And King's Landing especially, I think, looked awesome.
Oh,
It looked like this, like Saving Private Ryan D-Day, but in medieval dragon times.
Yeah,
like,
I watched the behind the episode thing, like the extended one or whatever for that, and I'm like kind of actually really mad / disappointed that they shot that whole Arya sequence, which was amazing. That whole like disaster movie sequence in one take. Like they shot it as a 12-minute for 15-minute one take like tracking shot, and they decided not to use it that way. And I was like, that would have been fucking amazing.
Oh man!
They felt, according to them, that it was more impactful to cut back and forth between Clegane Bowl and Arya's experiences, and I think it would have been more badass. I think they decided not to do it ultimately, my supposition or whatever is because they wanted to fake out kill Arya 3 times in a row, which like nobody thought she was actually going to die. Stop.
Right. Yeah.
But yeah, I wish it was one take because that would have been awesome.
I mean, that is why the inside the episode things just shouldn't have been there.
Yeah, right.
It's one of those things where it's like, man, I wish I didn't know that. More directors should take the David Lynch approach, where it's just like never actually say anything about what you intended to do with your your thing. You know?
The best quote of all time when the interviewer asks him, "Would you care to extrapolate?" and he just says, "No."
Yeah. Yeah, David says, like, actually, Eraserhead is my most spiritual film. And the guy's like, expand on that. No. And it's great. Like, more directors should be like that. Like, it's been bugging me with the Russos after Avengers Endgame, where, like, they seem like they want to explain every single plot point, like, in every decision they made with Endgame. It's just like, just let the movie sit for a while, man. Just let people, like, just let people, soak it in and that kind of thing. But I think that's also, I will say, I think, part of the reaction to Game of Thrones, I think, is partially reactionary to the reaction to Endgame in a weird way. Because you have the final season of Game of Thrones, and you have Endgame, which kind of acts as like the series finale on a few characters in the Marvel universe, and acts as a conclusion to this chapter of the Marvel story. And Endgame, universally well liked.
Yeah.
Like, just generally speaking, across the board, people enjoyed the movie. Some people have quibbles with it. So, I had some myself, but like overall, an enjoyable experience and like a really good way to send off all these characters. And then a few weeks later, Game of Thrones comes out.
Yeah,
and it's like, oh man, like we just got a really good version of this with Endgame.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, so I don't know. It's definitely weird, but yeah, as far as the production goes, I think everything was still really top notch, and especially I would definitely recommend watching Game of Thrones: The Last Watch, the documentary on HBO, which does really do a really good job of spotlighting some of the people whose work has been unsung. Especially the guy who plays the Night King is great in the documentary. Apparently, he's like the stunt coordinator on the show, and he's like a choreographer too. Huh. But yeah, he's like some Russian guy, and he's like talking about how I forget his name, and I apologize for that. But he's like a Russian dude, and he's like talking about his history in Russia and how like many of his friends are dead now, but like he's got the second chance in the U.S. and he became now he's in Ireland doing the Game of Thrones thing. He's the Night King, and he's they show a scene of him they show a scene where Kit Harington kind of pulls up to this place where like a bunch of fans are, and Kit Harington kind of like waves at them and walks into the building, and then you see the guy who plays the Night King pull up, walks up and sees the fans, and he like walks over to them. He's like, "Hey, you guys know who I am?" And the fans are like, "Yeah," and he does like the Night King like shoulder shrug.
Oh, that's awesome! And
it's great. It's super cool. And they show, I think there's a couple of really interesting moments in the documentary. They showed the table read for a few of the episodes too, which some images from that have kind of gone around online since last night, where you show Kit Harington discovering for the first time that he's going to be the one who kills Daenerys.
Yeah.
And Emilia Clarke already knows it, and so her face is really great, and like his face, like it's really interesting. Also, you see Conley Hill, who plays Varys. They show the scene where they're reading for the first time that Varys dies, and Conley Hill just kind of like leans back and like puts his script on the table and just like kind of pushes it forward because he's done.
That's amazing.
It's pretty great. But then there's like also just like really interesting intimate scenes. There's one scene where Emilia Clarke is like getting her hair and makeup done for like the last day of shooting for her, and talking to her like the makeup person who's been working with her for like 8 years, and like how emotional experience it is, and like it's really cool. It's a good like fly on the wall documentary, and definitely worth checking out if you're into Game of Thrones and into the behind the scenes kind of stuff. Definitely cool.
Yeah,
but yeah, and also the cast I think is also still pretty much outstanding this entire season too.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
But yeah, that is Game of Thrones, the final season, season 8. It is done. It is over now, and we will never hear from the Game of Thrones universe again until the prequel comes out. Which,
yep.
Do you think that'll be good? Just out of curiosity.
I mean, like, sure. Why? I don't know. I don't know if it'll be good. I'll give it a chance, though. You know.
That's the. I mean, I think it's Jane Goldman making it, who has worked with Matthew Vaughn on a lot of things, and she's a pretty talented screenwriter. But you know, I feel like it just seems like the rite of passage for every fantasy franchise to make prequels that are always bad. Like,
yeah,
you know, there was the Star Wars prequels, and then there was the Lord of the Rings prequels with The Hobbit, and then there was the Fantastic Beasts movies with Harry Potter, and it's like, all right, maybe we can not do this with Game of Thrones.
Maybe don't.
But we'll see. I mean, honestly, the finale leaves it open for future stuff down the line. I mean, like HBO's already denied that they're working on an Arya spinoff.
Yeah,
but like it sets it up where like you could do one. Like it's,
for sure.
It's one of those things. You could do an Arya spinoff. You could do like what are Jon Snow's adventures beyond the wall, like, which would be nothing. It'd be boring. There's no White Walkers anymore. What are they doing?
Well, why is
like,
there still a Night's Watch? Yeah,
but like an Arya spinoff could be interesting. But honestly, like, there's a line in the finale where Tyrion says something like, "Ask me again in 10 years." And I couldn't help but think, is that like a weird winking reference to like the fact that they're going to return with a new season in 10 years?
Like full of Twin Peaks.
Like Twin Peaks.
Oh, that'd be amazing.
That would be crazy if in 2029 we got a new season of Game of Thrones where it turns out Bran is a bad leader and they have to take him down or something.
Right?
Like,
that'd be awesome.
But yeah, anyway, Game of Thrones, final season. It's over. It's done with. And that about wraps it up for us. Mike, where can we find you online this week?
You can find me at MDFilmblog on Twitter, and I have also started using Letterboxd again because I finally was able to get an app for it on my new phone. And I don't remember what my thing is on that, but I'm on there, so don't worry about it.
I believe it's also MD Film.
Probably.
And I noticed, I was scrolling through my Letterboxd today, and I saw that you just rated like 18 million movies.
Yeah.
All from like 2013. It was like Captain Phillips 2.5 stars.
Like, wait a second.
I gotta talk to him about this.
Stay tuned.
By the way, Captain Phillips is great, Mike. Just throw it out.
Look, man, it was like 2 in the morning, and I was like, "Oh, I got all these movies. I should rate them."
But anyway, yeah. So yeah, you can follow Mike on Letterboxd. You can follow me on Letterboxd too. I'm Mike Smith Film on there, and I am M Smith Film Blog on Twitter. And you can find all of our podcast stuff through any of your podcast apps and at Rapture.press whenever that thing kicks off. All right, thank you for listening to Mike and Mike Go to the Movies. I'm Mike Smith, that's Mike DeCriscio, and once again, thanks to Kyle Cullen for joining us for the first half of this episode. Don't forget to rate and review the show on Apple Podcasts or any other podcast app, and if you want to contact us, hit us up at mikeandmikegotothemovies@gmail.com. Our next episode of Mike and Mike might actually be another double episode, if we can pull it off, as Mike and I talk the adrenaline rush we are sure to get hyped about giant monsters with Godzilla, King of the Monsters.
Goddamn right.
Comes out next week. Super excited about that. From the director of Trick or Treat, Mike Dougherty, by the way, which I'm also super psyched about. And then we'll hope not to be too disappointed with the last X-Men movie ever.
Sorry, go ahead.
What were you going to say?
It might have a very similar tone to this episode, where the first thing we love, and the second thing we don't love that much.
We will see what happens. Who knows? Maybe Dark Phoenix will surprise us, Mike. So yeah, the plan is double episode, Godzilla, King of the Monsters, X-Men, Dark Phoenix. We'll see how it goes. Plus, keep an eye out for the next complete works, which we'll see Nicolas Cage try to avoid some sharks in USS Indianapolis, Men of Courage. And that's the end of this week's episode of Mike and Mike Go to the Movies. We'll see you on the other side.
Chosen wise.
You totally just said John Wick.
John Wick.
John Wick 3.
The French remake of John Wick. All right, I'm going to get some water before we start.
All right.
Okay, fine.
Jesus Christ. What a fucking unprofessional.
What an amateur. Bush League.
It's like he's never done a podcast before.
What a nerd.
He doesn't have 8 cups of water sitting next to him. It's ridiculous.
Doesn't have an IV drip.
Oh my god, could you fucking imagine?
That'd be amazing.